A nurse cares for an arrogant millionaire in his final days, but a hidden photo in his office reveals an unexpected connection that changes everything. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. The air was crisp as Sarah Anderson parked her modest sedan in the long driveway leading up to the Hartford mansion. It was a vast estate tucked into the wooded hills of Connecticut, its grandeur both imposing and melancholy. The house, with its intricate stonework and towering windows, seemed almost too grand to hold ordinary life within it. Sarah adjusted the strap of her worn leather bag, her heart thudding with a mix of anticipation and unease. She was here for a job, but something about the place already made her feel like she had stepped into a world she wasn't sure she belonged to. At 35, Sarah was no stranger to challenges. A dedicated nurse, she had spent her life caring for others, driven by a deep empathy that she herself didn't fully understand. It was, in part, born out of her own scars. After the end of a 10-year relationship that left her grappling with loneliness, Sarah had thrown herself into her work. Still, there was an emptiness she couldn't shake. Perhaps this new role as a private caregiver for the Hartford family patriarch, William Hartford, would help fill it, or at least distract her from it. The door was opened by Elise, the family's longtime housekeeper. Petite and precise, with graying hair pulled into a severe bun, Elise's smile was more professional than warm. "You must be Miss Anderson," she said, stepping aside to let Sarah in. "Come, I'll take you to Mr. Hartford." Inside, the mansion was even more imposing. The entryway alone was large enough to hold Sarah's entire apartment, its floors gleaming and walls adorned with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. There was an air of heaviness in the house, a feeling that the walls had absorbed generations of triumphs and sorrows alike. "You'll find Mr. Hartford challenging," Elise said as they walked through the corridors. Her voice softened slightly. "But he's not a bad man, just a man who's been alone too long." Sarah didn't reply, her thoughts preoccupied. William Hartford was a name she had known even before taking this job. A wealthy industrialist, now retired and terminally ill, he was as famous for his fortune as for his reclusive nature. Rumors swirled about estrangements within his family, particularly with his only son, Matteo. The press painted him as brilliant but cold, a man who valued his empire more than his relationships. Now, facing the twilight of his life, he had turned to someone like Sarah to see him through. Elise led her to a study, its massive oak doors ajar. Inside, William Hartford sat by a fireplace in a wheelchair, his figure thin but still commanding. He had a gaunt face framed by neatly combed white hair, and his piercing blue eyes met Sarah's as she entered. There was a flicker of curiosity, quickly replaced by indifference. "You must be the nurse," he said, his voice gravelly. "They said you'd be here by noon." Sarah swallowed the sharpness of his tone. "I'm Sarah Anderson, Mr. Hartford." "It's a pleasure to meet you." He gave a dry chuckle. "I wouldn't go that far just yet." As she introduced herself and began to assess his needs, Sarah noted the signs of his isolation, the sparse arrangement of personal items, the lack of warmth in the space. But there was also something else, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. His sharp remarks, though laced with bitterness, hinted at a mind still vibrant beneath the wear of his illness. It intrigued her, even as it put her on edge. After the initial meeting, Elise showed Sarah to her quarters, a small but comfortable room tucked into a quiet wing of the house. "If you need anything, just ask," Elise said, hesitating as if weighing whether to add more. "And don't take Mr. Hartford's words too personally. He's not as harsh as he seems." Sarah gave a faint smile. "I've dealt with difficult patients before." Later that evening, Sarah ventured into the kitchen, hoping for a cup of tea. She found Elise there, chatting in low tones with Paul, William's lawyer. Paul was in his early 40s, with a sharp suit and an air of quiet calculation. He greeted Sarah politely but briefly before turning back to Elise. "There are things that need to be sorted out," Sarah overheard Paul say as she stirred her tea. "Before it's too late." The cryptic remark lingered in Sarah's mind as she returned to her room. Her first day had left her with more questions than answers. Who was William Hartford, really? And what had driven him to cut himself off from his family, especially his son? There was a story here, hidden beneath the surface, and Sarah couldn't help but feel drawn to uncover it. As she lay in bed that night, listening to the distant rustle of trees outside, Sarah resolved to approach this job as more than just another assignment. There was something about this place, about the people in it, that felt pivotal. And though she didn't yet know how, she sensed that coming here would change her, not just as a nurse, but as a person. The following morning, sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Hartford mansion, casting long shadows on the polished floors. Sarah, now slightly more accustomed to the quiet opulence, began her routine by organizing William's study. The room, lined with shelves of books and decorated with relics of a life lived in pursuit of power and success, felt like a world unto itself. The air was heavy with the scent of aged leather and a faint trace of cigar smoke, as though the past refused to be fully aired out. Sarah worked methodically, arranging medical supplies and clearing clutter to create a more functional space. She tried not to let her thoughts wander, but the cryptic interactions from the previous day lingered in her mind. William's sharp, guarded demeanor was unsettling, but also intriguing. Beneath his brusque remarks, there had been a flicker of something, perhaps curiosity, perhaps regret. As she moved a stack of old ledgers to make room for his medications, a worn envelope fell from between the pages. It landed softly on the desk, its edges yellowed with age. Curious, Sarah picked it up. Inside was a black and white photograph. The image showed a group of young graduates standing in front of a grand university building, their faces alight with the optimism of youth. At first glance, the picture seemed unremarkable until Sarah's eyes landed on a familiar face. Her breath caught. There, among the young men and women, was her grandmother, Ellen. Ellen Anderson had been a central figure in Sarah's life, a beacon of strength and kindness. A schoolteacher in a small town, she had lived modestly but profoundly, instilling in her granddaughter the values of empathy and resilience. To see her here in this unexpected context was both startling and moving. But Ellen wasn't the only one in the photograph. Standing beside her, slightly apart from the group, was a young man with striking features. Even through the faded clarity of the photograph, Sarah could tell it was William Hartford. His posture was reserved, his gaze distant, but there was a subtle intensity to his expression that mirrored the man she had met yesterday. How could they have known each other? The question tugged at Sarah, mingling with a flood of memories. She remembered afternoons spent listening to Ellen's stories, though none of them had mentioned a connection to someone as prominent as William. Ellen had always spoken of her students, her faith in their potential, and her belief that education could transform lives. Could William Hartford have been one of those students? Her mind swirled with questions, but she tucked the photograph back into the envelope. Whatever the connection, it wasn't her place to speculate, not yet. She returned to her task, but the discovery weighed on her thoughts. Later that day, Sarah brought William his medication. He was seated by the window, looking out at the sprawling gardens with an expression that was hard to read. She hesitated for a moment, then decided to test the waters. "You have quite the collection of books in your study," she said casually as she handed him a glass of water. "It must hold a lot of memories." William glanced at her, his piercing blue eyes narrowing slightly. Memories, perhaps. Or just clutter. There was a long pause before he added, almost as an afterthought, "Some things are best left undisturbed." The remark sent a chill through Sarah. Did he know she had found the photograph? His tone was vague, yet it carried a weight that made her uneasy. That evening, Sarah found herself in the kitchen again, sipping tea while Elise bustled about preparing the evening meal. The housekeeper seemed more relaxed here, her movements fluid and assured. Sarah decided to venture a question. "Elise," she began, "did Mr. Hartford ever talk about his younger years, about people who might have been important to him?" Elise paused, her hands stilling over the cutting board. She glanced at Sarah, her expression cautious. "Why do you ask?" "I found an old photograph while tidying up," Sarah admitted, choosing her words carefully. "It looked like it was from a graduation. My grandmother was in it, alongside Mr. Hartford." Elise's eyes widened briefly before she masked her surprise. "Your grandmother?" "Ellen Anderson," Sarah said softly. "She was a teacher." For a moment, it seemed as though Elise might say something, but she simply nodded. "I've worked here a long time," she said finally, "but Mr. Hartford doesn't speak much about his past. It's complicated." The housekeeper's reluctance to elaborate only deepened Sarah's curiosity. "Was he always this distant?" Elise sighed, a hint of sadness creeping into her voice. "There's more to Mr. Hartford than what you see now, but time and choices have a way of shaping people, for better or worse." Sarah didn't press further, sensing that Elise had already said more than she intended. Still, the photograph and its implications stayed with her as she returned to her room that night. Her grandmother had always believed in the potential for change, in the power of connection. Had she seen something in William Hartford all those years ago? And if so, had it made any difference? As she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Sarah realized that this job might not be as straightforward as she had thought. There was a history here, threads of the past intertwining with the present, and she was now part of it. Whatever secrets William Hartford was guarding, Sarah was determined to uncover the truth, not out of mere curiosity, but because she felt, deep down, that her grandmother would have wanted her to. For the first time in years, Sarah felt the faint stirrings of purpose. It wasn't just about caring for William, it was about understanding the man he had been, the man he was now, and perhaps the man he still had the potential to become. The next morning, Sarah entered William's study, greeted by the faint crackle of a fire in the hearth. William was seated in his wheelchair near the window, his gaze fixed on the frost-kissed gardens outside. His aloof demeanor filled the room like a silent barrier. Sarah carried a tray with his morning medication and a glass of water, her steps careful as she approached. "Good morning, Mr. Hartford," she said with gentle cheer, setting the tray on a side table. He barely turned his head, his voice curt. "Is it?" Sarah paused, her composure steady despite the sharpness in his tone. "It can be, if we let it." William huffed, his eyes narrowing. "Spare me the platitudes, nurse. I've lived too long to be swayed by optimism." Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "It's Sarah," she said calmly, "and I'm not here to sway you, just to help you." For a moment, his expression flickered, surprise, perhaps, or curiosity, but it was quickly replaced by a stony silence. Sarah busied herself arranging his medication, refusing to let his resistance rattle her. She had encountered difficult patients before, but something about William felt different. His hostility wasn't born of anger alone. It carried the weight of disappointment and unspoken regret. As the day unfolded, Sarah faced a series of small challenges. William dismissed her attempts to engage him in conversation, brushing off her questions with sarcasm or outright indifference. When she suggested a short session of physical therapy to help with his circulation, he flatly refused. "I've no intention of prolonging this," he snapped. "Spare yourself the effort." Sarah's patience was tested, but she remained resolute. "It's not about prolonging anything," she countered. "It's about making the time you have left more comfortable." William didn't respond, his lips pressing into a thin line. Sarah took his silence as a small victory and left him to his thoughts. Later, in the quiet of the kitchen, Sarah found Elise peeling potatoes for dinner. The housekeeper looked up as Sarah entered, her expression softening. "You've had your first taste of Mr. Hartford's temper, I see," Elise said with a wry smile. Sarah chuckled lightly, pouring herself a cup of tea. "He's certainly a challenge." Elise nodded, her hands deft as she worked. "He wasn't always this way, you know. When I first came to work here, he was distant but kind. Time and illness have changed him, and the estrangement from his son." She trailed off, shaking her head. "Matteo," Sarah said softly, testing the name. Elise's hands paused for a fraction of a second before continuing. "Yes, they haven't spoken in years. It's not my place to say why, but it weighs on Mr. Hartford more than he'd admit." The mention of Matteo stirred something in Sarah, a faint thread she couldn't yet grasp. She stored the information away, knowing it might prove important later. The next few days followed a similar pattern. William resisted Sarah's every effort to engage him, his words sharp and his demeanor colder than the January air outside. Yet, Sarah noticed small cracks in his armor. Once, when she accidentally knocked over a pile of books, he grumbled but leaned forward to help steady the stack. Another time, he allowed her to adjust the cushions on his chair without complaint. It was Elise who provided a window into William's past. Over tea one evening, she shared fragments of his life story. "Did you know," Elise began, her voice low, "that Mr. Hartford struggled with dyslexia as a boy? Back then, they didn't understand it the way we do now. He was labeled a failure by most of his teachers." Sarah looked up, intrigued. "How did he overcome it?" Elise smiled faintly. "Someone believed in him. Someone who saw potential where others didn't." She hesitated before adding, "He doesn't talk about it, but I've always suspected it's one of the reasons he became so successful, to prove them all wrong." Sarah's mind raced. Could that someone have been her grandmother? The photograph she had found suggested a connection, but William's guarded nature made it impossible to confirm. Still, the idea sparked a flicker of hope. If Ellen had played a role in shaping the man William had become, perhaps Sarah could use that legacy to reach him. The next day, Sarah approached William with a quiet determination. He was sitting in his usual spot by the window, the light casting sharp lines across his face. "I understand you had to fight to get where you are," she said, her tone measured, "that it wasn't easy." William turned to her, his expression wary. "What do you know about it?" "Not much," Sarah admitted, "but I do know that no one achieves anything alone. There must have been people who believed in you." For a moment, William's gaze softened, the hardness in his eyes giving way to something more vulnerable. But just as quickly, he looked away. "Belief is overrated," he muttered. "People believe in fairy tales too." Sarah let the comment pass, sensing that pressing further would only push him away. Instead, she focused on creating an environment of quiet care, offering help without expectation. Her patience was not lost on him, even if he refused to acknowledge it. That evening, as Sarah prepared to leave his study, William spoke unexpectedly. "You're persistent," he said, his voice grudging but tinged with something close to respect. Sarah smiled, meeting his gaze. "It's part of the job." He nodded, a faint smile ghosting his lips before fading away. "Then you might just last here longer than the others." As she left the room, Sarah felt a small surge of triumph. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a sliver of connection in the midst of resistance. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she was prepared to face it, one step at a time. The days in the Hartford mansion unfolded in a rhythm of cautious exchanges and quiet observation. William Hartford maintained his guarded demeanor, but Sarah Anderson had learned to read the subtle cues beneath his brusque words and sharp tone. It was during one of their morning sessions that the first crack in his armor appeared. The January sky was a dull gray, mirroring the somber atmosphere inside the house. Sarah wheeled a small cart into William's study, carrying a tray with his breakfast and medication. He sat by the window, as always, staring out at the barren garden with an expression that seemed to drift between irritation and longing. "I brought your oatmeal," Sarah said lightly, placing the tray on the table beside him. "Cooked just the way you like it, plain and entirely uninteresting." William turned, his eyebrows raising slightly. "Is that your idea of humor?" "Call it an observation," Sarah replied, suppressing a smile. "But if you'd prefer something more adventurous, I can ask Elise to add cinnamon, maybe even a few raisins if you're feeling wild." For the first time, a faint chuckle escaped William, though he quickly masked it with a cough. "You're persistent, I'll give you that." Sarah took the opportunity to sit down nearby, maintaining a comfortable distance. "It's part of the job. But persistence only works if it's paired with understanding." "Understanding?" William echoed, his tone skeptical. "What is it you think you understand about me?" Sarah hesitated, carefully choosing her words. "That you've built walls around yourself, walls that have probably served you well for most of your life, but now, maybe they're keeping out things you still need." William's gaze sharpened, his piercing blue eyes narrowing as if to assess her sincerity. For a moment, Sarah thought he might dismiss her outright, but instead he leaned back in his chair, his expression softening ever so slightly. "Do you think I need your sympathy, nurse?" "It's Sarah," she corrected gently. "And no, I don't think you need sympathy, but I do think everyone needs someone to listen." William's lips pressed into a thin line, his gaze drifting back to the window. "Listening doesn't change anything," he muttered. Sarah didn't press further, sensing that he was wrestling with his own thoughts. She remained silent, letting the conversation rest. That evening, as the house settled into its usual quiet, Sarah found herself reflecting on her grandmother, Ellen. She sat in her small room, holding the photograph she had discovered days earlier. The image of Ellen, vibrant and full of promise, stirred a mixture of emotions in Sarah. She had always admired her grandmother's strength, but now she wondered about the parts of Ellen's life she had never known. Determined to learn more, Sarah approached Elise in the kitchen the next morning. The housekeeper was preparing a pot of tea, her movements practiced and efficient. "Elise," Sarah began cautiously, "I've been thinking about the photograph I mentioned. My grandmother and Mr. Hartford must have known each other quite well." Elise paused, her hands stilling over the teapot. "Ellen Anderson," she murmured, as if testing the name. "Yes, I believe they did. She was important to him once." Sarah leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. "Important how?" Elise hesitated, her expression conflicted. "It's not my story to tell," she said finally. "But I will say this. Your grandmother had a way of seeing the best in people, even when they couldn't see it themselves. She believed in him when no one else did." Sarah's chest tightened at the words. Ellen's unwavering belief in others was something Sarah had witnessed firsthand, but hearing it in the context of William Hartford made it feel almost prophetic. What had her grandmother seen in this man, decades ago, that had left such a lasting impression? Later that day, Sarah decided to take a different approach. She brought a book from the study to William, one she had noticed had a well-worn spine and a bookmark still tucked between its pages. "I thought you might like to revisit this," she said, placing it on the table beside him. William glanced at the book, The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway, and frowned. "Do you always presume to know what I like?" "I try," Sarah replied with a small smile. "But I'll admit, I'm guessing with this one. It seemed significant." William's fingers brushed the cover, his expression unreadable. "I read this when I was younger," he said after a long pause. "It's a story about struggle and futility, a man who fights a losing battle, only to find that winning doesn't always mean what you think it does." His voice was quieter now, tinged with a vulnerability that surprised Sarah. She sat down across from him, folding her hands in her lap. "Do you think it's really about losing?" she asked. "Or is it about finding meaning in the fight itself?" William's eyes met hers, and for the first time there was a hint of something other than resistance, perhaps curiosity, or even respect. He didn't answer, but the silence that followed felt less like a barrier and more like an invitation. As the evening drew to a close, Sarah left the study with a sense of accomplishment. It was a small victory, but a meaningful one. William was beginning to open up, even if only slightly. And Sarah knew that moments like these were the first steps towards something larger. That night, as she prepared for bed, Sarah found herself thinking again about Ellen. Her grandmother had always believed that everyone had the capacity for change, no matter how buried it might be. And now, as Sarah worked to connect with William, she felt the weight of that belief guiding her actions. This was more than a job. It was a journey, a chance to honor Ellen's legacy and perhaps, in the process, heal some of the wounds in her own heart. The days at the Hartford mansion seemed to blend into one another, each punctuated by William's sharp remarks and Sarah's steadfast patience. Yet, beneath the surface, an undeniable shift had begun. William was speaking more, small revelations, tucked into moments of shared silence or veiled behind dry wit. Sarah had grown attuned to these glimpses, treasuring them as signs of progress. It was during one of these moments, while arranging his study shelves, that William reached for a small, weathered box on the table beside him. He hesitated, his fingers tracing its edges as though weighing whether to open it. Finally, he turned to Sarah, his voice quieter than usual. "There's something I've been meaning to give you," he said. "It's not much, but it might answer some of the questions you've been too polite to ask." Sarah paused, her hands hovering over a stack of books. "Questions?" William's lips quirked in a faint smile. "You're not as subtle as you think, nurse." "It's Sarah," she corrected gently, moving closer as he handed her the box. Inside, she found an old journal, its leather cover cracked with age. The initials W. H were embossed in faded gold on the front. "I started keeping that when I was younger," William said, his voice tight with something unspoken. "Before I became the man you see now." Sarah carefully opened the journal, her eyes skimming the first few pages. The entries were brief, written in neat but occasionally shaky handwriting. They spoke of frustrations with school, feelings of inadequacy, and fleeting moments of hope sparked by a teacher who believed in him. Her breath caught as she came across a familiar name, Ellen Anderson. The words were simple but deeply felt, descriptions of a young woman's unwavering faith in a struggling student, her refusal to let him succumb to self-doubt. Sarah's fingers trembled as she turned the pages, her grandmother's legacy coming to life in William's words. "She was relentless," William said, his tone tinged with both fondness and exasperation. "Refused to let me give up, even when I wanted to. Said I had potential, though I never understood why she thought so. Sarah looked up, meeting his gaze. She saw the best in people. It's who she was. William nodded, his eyes distant. She saved me in ways I didn't realize until much later. If it hadn't been for her, well, let's just say I wouldn't be sitting here today. The admission hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Sarah closed the journal gently, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and sorrow. She had always admired her grandmother, but hearing this from William gave her a deeper understanding of the woman Ellen had been and the impact she had left behind. That evening, Sarah sat by the fireplace in the small sitting room adjacent to her quarters, the journal resting in her lap. She had read more of its pages, each one painting a picture of a young man grappling with challenges that seemed insurmountable at the time. Through it all, Ellen's presence had been a steady anchor, her belief in him a lifeline he hadn't known he needed. Sarah's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. Elise entered, carrying a tray with 2 cups of tea. She set it down on the table and sat across from Sarah, her expression kind but inquisitive. "You've been quiet today," Elise said, handing her a cup. "I take it Mr. Hartford shared something with you." Sarah nodded, her fingers tightening around the cup's warm ceramic. "He gave me his journal. It mentions my grandmother." Elise's eyes softened. "I thought it might." Sarah hesitated before asking, "Why didn't he tell me sooner about her, I mean?" Elise sighed, her hands clasped in her lap. "William doesn't share easily. His past. It's complicated, but I think he's beginning to trust you." "That's no small thing." Sarah considered this, her thoughts swirling. He said she saved him, that she believed in him when no one else did. "She did," Elise confirmed. "Your grandmother had a gift for seeing what others couldn't. She left a mark on him, even if he hasn't always known how to show it." Sarah's chest tightened at the words. She had come here expecting to care for a man in his final days, but now it felt like so much more. There was a connection between them, a thread woven by her grandmother that tied their lives together in ways she was only beginning to understand. The next morning, Sarah entered William's study with the journal in hand. He was seated by the window, as usual, the winter sunlight casting long shadows across the room. She placed the journal on the table beside him, her voice steady. "Thank you for sharing this with me," she said. "It means more than you know." William looked at the journal, his expression unreadable. "I thought it was time," he said simply. "Time to stop keeping everything locked away." Sarah hesitated, then decided to take a chance. "You mentioned once that belief doesn't change anything, but I think it does. I think my grandmother's belief in you changed everything." For a moment, William didn't respond. Then he nodded, his gaze distant. "Maybe you're right. But belief isn't enough, Sarah. It has to be followed by action." His words resonated with Sarah, stirring something deep within her. She had spent so much of her life caring for others, guided by Ellen's example. But now, she realized, this was more than a job. It was a chance to honor her grandmother's legacy, to help William find peace with his past before it was too late. That evening, as she prepared for bed, Sarah felt a newfound sense of purpose. She wasn't just a caregiver. She was a bridge between the past and the present, between the man William had been and the man he still had the potential to become. And she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The winter morning dawned quietly over the Hartford mansion, its thick walls holding in the warmth of the fireplaces that Elise had lit before sunrise. Sarah sat at the small desk in her quarters, her hands resting on the aged leather journal that William had entrusted to her. The pages contained more than just William's words. They were a window into a life marked by struggle, resilience, and a longing for something that remained unspoken. Taking a deep breath, Sarah opened the journal to where she had left off. The entries painted a picture of a boy who felt out of place in the world, grappling with the challenges of dyslexia in a time when such struggles were misunderstood. Teachers dismissed him as incapable, and classmates mocked him, but amidst the despair, one figure stood out: Ellen Anderson. Sarah's grandmother, with her unwavering belief in William's potential, had been a lifeline, her encouragement sparking a quiet determination that grew with time. One passage in particular caught Sarah's attention. "Miss Anderson never gave up on me, even when I'd given up on myself. She said I had a mind built for solving problems, not for following rules. For the first time, I thought maybe she was right." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she traced the words with her fingertips. The echoes of her grandmother's kindness resonated deeply, reinforcing the sense of purpose she felt in being here. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Elise stood in the hallway, her expression calm but concerned. "Matteo has arrived," Elise said quietly. Sarah's heart quickened. She had heard William mention his son only in passing, and always with a trace of regret that he quickly masked. The estrangement between them was a shadow that loomed over the household, unspoken but ever present. "Where is he?" Sarah asked. "In the library," Elise replied. "He wanted to speak with Paul first." Sarah nodded, her thoughts racing. She tucked the journal into a drawer and followed Elise to the library. As they approached, Sarah could hear the low hum of voices, one calm and measured, Paul's no doubt, and the other clipped and tense, likely Matteo's. Elise gestured for Sarah to wait before stepping inside, leaving the door slightly ajar. Through the opening, Sarah caught her first glimpse of Matteo. He stood by the window, his posture stiff and his hands shoved into the pockets of his tailored coat. His dark hair was impeccably styled, and his sharp features bore a striking resemblance to his father's, though his expression carried a cool detachment. "I didn't come here to discuss business," Matteo was saying, his voice firm. "I only want to know why he summoned me after all this time." Paul, seated in a leather armchair, adjusted his glasses. "William's health is declining, Matteo. He wants to put certain matters in order." Matteo let out a dry laugh. "Matters he ignored for years. And now I'm supposed to drop everything because he's decided it's convenient." Paul's expression remained neutral. "He's still your father." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Matteo didn't respond, instead turning his gaze to the window. Sarah felt a pang of empathy for him. It was clear that the pain of the past still weighed heavily on his shoulders. That afternoon, Matteo finally agreed to see William. Sarah waited in the corridor outside the study, her heart pounding as the door opened, and Matteo stepped inside. She wished she could eavesdrop, but she knew it wasn't her place. Instead, she busied herself in the nearby sitting room, trying to focus on a book, but finding the words meaningless. After what felt like an eternity, Matteo emerged from the study, his expression unreadable. He walked past Sarah without a word, heading toward the front door. Sarah hesitated, then called out to him, "Matteo?" He stopped but didn't turn around. "What?" She stepped closer, her voice gentle. "I don't know what happened in there, but I can tell you care. Otherwise, you wouldn't have come." Matteo finally turned to face her, his eyes narrowing. "And who are you to tell me what I care about?" "I'm Sarah," she said, meeting his gaze steadily. "Your father's nurse, and I've seen enough to know that he regrets how things turned out between you." Matteo studied her for a moment, then shook his head. "Regret doesn't change the past." "No," Sarah agreed, "but it can shape the future." He didn't respond, but something in his expression softened before he turned and walked away. That evening, Sarah brought the journal to William, who was resting by the fire. She handed it to him without a word, and he accepted it with a faint nod. "I read more of it," she said after a moment. "You wrote about my grandmother, about how she helped you see yourself differently." William's lips twitched into a faint smile. "She was the first person who ever believed in me, and sometimes I hated her for it." Sarah frowned, puzzled. "Why?" "Because it forced me to confront my own self-doubt," William admitted. "She wouldn't let me wallow in it, and I wasn't ready to face it at the time." Sarah nodded, her heart aching for the boy he had been. "She believed in you because she saw what you were capable of, and she was right." William's gaze grew distant. "I wonder if Matteo sees anything in me worth believing in." Sarah hesitated, then said softly, "It's not too late to show him." For the first time, William looked vulnerable. He didn't respond, but his silence spoke volumes. As Sarah returned to her room that night, she felt the weight of the day settle over her. The tension between William and Matteo was palpable, and she sensed that the path to reconciliation would be fraught with challenges. But the journal had given her hope, a reminder that even the most fractured relationships could be mended with time and effort. And as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Sarah resolved to do whatever she could to help them find their way back to each other. The following morning dawned heavy with tension, the kind that seemed to seep into the walls of the Hartford mansion. Sarah approached her day with quiet resolve, determined to bridge the widening gap between William and Matteo. As she carried William's morning tea into his study, she found him staring out the window, his expression unreadable. The journal rested on the table beside him, closed but not forgotten. "Good morning," Sarah said, placing the tray down gently. William glanced at her, his gaze sharp but tired. "Is it?" "That depends," she replied lightly. "Are you going to let it be?" A faint smirk tugged at his lips, but it disappeared just as quickly. "You're relentless, aren't you?" "I prefer to think of it as persistent," Sarah said with a small smile. She poured his tea, allowing a moment of silence before continuing. "Matteo came yesterday. He stayed longer than I expected." William's eyes darkened, "and left just as quickly." "Perhaps," Sarah said carefully, "but he came." "That has to mean something." William didn't respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "I've made too many mistakes with him. I don't know if there's anything left to salvage." Sarah sat down across from him, meeting his gaze. "You can't change the past, William, but you can decide what you do with the time you have now." Her words seemed to land heavily. William leaned back in his chair, his expression a mixture of frustration and regret. "And what would you have me do, Nurse Anderson? Beg for his forgiveness?" "Not beg," Sarah said firmly. "But maybe it's time to show him the part of yourself you've kept hidden, the part my grandmother saw all those years ago." William let out a dry laugh. "Easier said than done." "Most things worth doing are," Sarah replied, her tone gentle but unwavering. That afternoon, Sarah sought out Matteo, who had stayed in one of the guest rooms overnight. She found him in the garden, his hands buried in the pockets of his coat as he paced along the frost-covered paths. The cold air turned his breath into faint clouds, and his expression was as guarded as ever. "Matteo," Sarah called softly, approaching him. He turned, his eyes narrowing slightly as he saw her. "Shouldn't you be inside, tending to my father?" he said, his tone clipped. "I'm here for both of you," Sarah replied calmly, "if you'll let me be." Matteo sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. "Why do you care? You're just doing your job." "Maybe at first," Sarah admitted, "but it's more than that now. I see the pain you're both carrying, and I think it's worth trying to heal." Matteo shook his head, his expression skeptical. "You don't understand." He's always been this way, distant, consumed by his work. He only sees people when they're useful to him. Maybe that's how it's felt, Sarah said gently. But people can change. Matteo, I've seen it. Matteo's jaw tightened. And what if it's too late? It's not, Sarah said firmly. Not if you're both willing to try. He didn't respond, but his silence was less defensive now, tinged with a flicker of uncertainty. That evening, Sarah returned to William's study. Elise had told her that William hadn't eaten much during dinner, and she suspected his mood had soured further. She found him sitting by the fire, his hands clasped tightly as he stared into the flames. "You're avoiding him," Sarah said without preamble. William looked up sharply. "And what would you have me do, Sarah? Pretend everything is fine?" "No," Sarah said, her voice steady, "but you can be honest with him. Tell him what you just told me, that you regret the mistakes you've made." William's expression hardened, but she pressed on. "Matteo wants to believe there's something worth saving here. He may not say it, but he wouldn't have come if he didn't." For a long moment, William didn't speak. Then, with a heavy sigh, he leaned back in his chair. "I don't know how to fix this." "You start by trying," Sarah said simply. William looked at her, his expression a mixture of doubt and hope. "And what makes you think he'll listen?" "Because he's your son," Sarah said. "And deep down, I think he still cares." The next morning, William surprised everyone by asking Elise to arrange breakfast in the dining room, a rare occurrence that hadn't happened in years. When Matteo entered, his surprise was evident, though he quickly masked it with his usual guarded demeanor. As they sat down, the silence was heavy, broken only by the clinking of silverware. It was William who finally spoke. "Matteo," he began, his voice gruff, "I know I haven't earned the right to ask this, but I'd like to talk." Matteo's fork paused mid-air. He looked at his father, his expression unreadable. "Talk about what?" "About us," William said simply. "About the things I've done wrong." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken emotion. Sarah watched from the doorway, her heart pounding. This was the beginning of something fragile, but it was a beginning nonetheless. As father and son began to speak, the distance between them seemed to shrink, if only slightly. It was a tentative step, but it carried the weight of possibility, a chance for redemption, however uncertain. And for Sarah, it was enough to hold on to hope. The dining room of the Hartford mansion, with its heavy oak table and intricate chandeliers, felt more intimate than usual as father and son sat across from each other. The air was charged with a tentative energy, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Sarah lingered just beyond the doorway, observing with quiet hope. William began hesitantly, his fingers tapping the edge of his coffee cup. "I know I haven't given you many reasons to be here, Matteo. And for that, I'm sorry." Matteo's expression was guarded, his shoulders stiff as he leaned back in his chair. "It's a little late for apologies, don't you think?" "Perhaps," William admitted, his tone surprisingly even. "But late is better than never. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not sure I deserve it, but I do want to try." Matteo's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "Why now?" "Because you're dying." William flinched, the bluntness of the words striking him visibly, but he nodded. "Yes. And because I don't want to leave this world with the weight of everything unsaid." Matteo's lips pressed into a thin line, but he didn't respond. The silence stretched, and Sarah worried the moment might collapse under its own fragility. Before William could say more, Matteo spoke, his voice quieter. "I spent years trying to get your attention, and when I finally stopped trying, you didn't even notice." "I did notice," William said softly, "but by then I didn't know how to fix it. I told myself it was easier to focus on work, to build something tangible, But I see now that it came at a cost, one I'm still paying. Matteo's gaze dropped to the table, his jaw tightening. You always put the company first. William exhaled heavily. I did. And I was wrong. The honesty in his words hung in the air, and for the first time, Matteo's rigid posture softened. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step. Later that day, Sarah found Matteo in the library, pacing between the shelves with a restless energy. He stopped when he saw her, his expression wary but less closed off than before. Do you always hover? He asked, a trace of humor in his voice. Only when I think it's necessary, Sarah replied, smiling faintly. She stepped closer, her hands clasped in front of her. That was a big step this morning, for both of you. Matteo shrugged, his gaze shifting to the rows of books. It doesn't erase everything. No, but it's a start, Sarah said gently, and sometimes that's enough. He studied her for a moment, as though trying to gauge her sincerity. You seem awfully invested in this. Sarah hesitated, then spoke honestly. Because I know what it's like to lose someone and wish you'd had more time to make things right. Matteo's expression softened, a flicker of understanding passing between them. Did you? My grandmother, Sarah said. She was the most important person in my life. And there are things I wish I could tell her, things I wish I'd asked. But now I can only carry her memory. Matteo nodded, his gaze thoughtful. It's strange. I spent so much time resenting my father that I never stopped to think about what he might be carrying. Sarah placed a hand on his arm, her voice steady. It's not too late to find out. That evening, Sarah returned to William's study to check on him. He was seated by the fire, the journal resting on his lap. The flickering flames cast shadows across his face, making him look older, wearier. He stayed longer than I expected, William said without looking up. Because he wants to, Sarah replied, pulling up a chair. He may not say it, but he's here for a reason. William sighed, his fingers tracing the edges of the journal. I've spent so many years building walls. Now I'm not sure how to tear them down. You don't have to do it all at once, Sarah said gently. Just one brick at a time. William's lips quirked into a faint smile. You make it sound simple. It's not, Sarah admitted, but it's worth it. For a moment, they sat in companionable silence, the fire crackling softly in the background. Then William spoke again, his voice tinged with vulnerability. Do you think he'll ever forgive me? I think he's already trying, Sarah said. And that's more than most people get. The next morning, Sarah found Matteo in the sitting room, studying a small stack of photographs. He glanced up as she entered, a mixture of curiosity and hesitation in his eyes. These were in a drawer in his study, Matteo said, holding up one of the photos. It showed a much younger William standing beside a small boy who could only be Matteo. Both were smiling, though the moment seemed frozen in a time that felt far away. I don't remember this, Matteo admitted, his voice tinged with sadness. I thought he never cared about those moments. Sarah sat down beside him. Sometimes people hold on to things they don't know how to express. Maybe this was his way of keeping those memories close. Matteo nodded slowly, his fingers brushing the edges of the photo. I don't know if I can ever forget what he put me through. But I don't want to carry this anger forever. You don't have to decide everything right now, Sarah said. Just take it one day at a time. Matteo looked at her, his expression softer than she had seen before. You really believe he can change, don't you? I believe anyone can if they're willing to try, Sarah said with quiet conviction. For the first time, Matteo smiled, a small, hesitant smile, but genuine. Maybe you're right. As Sarah left the room, she felt a renewed sense of hope. The bridge between father and son was still fragile, but it was there, and for now, that was enough. The house was quiet that morning, save for the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards and the soft rustle of curtains in the winter breeze. Sarah, feeling the weight of the past days, decided to spend some time in William's study, hoping to continue piecing together the fragments of his life. The journal sat on the desk, but something else caught her eye. An envelope tucked beneath a stack of books. Curiosity piqued. She carefully pulled it free. The envelope was old, the paper yellowed with time, and it bore a faint inscription in elegant cursive, Brimfield. Inside were folded pages, a map, and a photograph. The photo showed a younger William standing outside a small brick schoolhouse, his arms slung awkwardly around a woman Sarah immediately recognized as her grandmother, Ellen. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she unfolded the letter. It was addressed to someone named Rose and was filled with gratitude and admiration for Ellen. The letter spoke of a treasure left behind in Brimfield, a place Sarah hadn't heard of before now. The map appeared to pinpoint the location of the school. "Miss Anderson believed in me when no one else did," William had written. "She told me I would leave my mark on the world, even if it seemed impossible then. Brimfield holds what I couldn't express at the time, a piece of my gratitude and my hopes for the future." As Sarah read, a wave of emotion swept over her. The connection between William and Ellen was deeper than she had imagined. This treasure, whatever it was, seemed to hold the key to understanding their bond. Sarah resolved to bring it up with William. That afternoon, Sarah approached William, who was sitting by the window, his face illuminated by the weak winter sunlight. She held the envelope and its contents in her hands. "I found this in your study," she began gently, handing it to him. William's expression shifted as he opened the envelope, his brows furrowing as he examined its contents. "I thought I'd lost this," he murmured, his voice tinged with both surprise and sadness. "What is Brimfield?" Sarah asked. William's gaze grew distant. "A small town where I went to school for a short time. Ellen taught there before she moved on to other places. It's where she helped me find my footing." "And the treasure?" Sarah pressed, her curiosity impossible to suppress. A faint smile ghosted across William's lips. "It's nothing as grand as it sounds. Just memories. Things I couldn't say at the time, captured in a way I hoped might endure." Sarah hesitated before suggesting, "Maybe it's time to revisit those memories. To see what you left behind." William's eyes met hers, the intensity of his gaze both challenging and vulnerable. "What's the point, Sarah? The past can't be undone." "No," Sarah agreed, "but it can be understood. And maybe, just maybe, it can help you and Matteo find some common ground." William didn't respond immediately. He looked down at the map, his fingers tracing the lines. Finally, he nodded. "All right, let's go to Brimfield." The trip to Brimfield was made on a cold but clear day. Matteo, surprisingly, agreed to accompany them. Sarah sensed his reluctance, but there was also a quiet determination in his demeanor. The drive was mostly silent, punctuated only by the hum of the car engine and the occasional question from Sarah about directions. When they arrived, the town of Brimfield greeted them with a sense of timelessness. The old schoolhouse still stood, its red bricks weathered but sturdy. The sight of it seemed to draw a mix of emotions from William, who sat quietly in the car for a moment before finally stepping out. Inside, the school was empty, its wooden floors creaking under their footsteps. Sarah noticed a small locked box on a shelf in one corner. William moved toward it slowly, his movements deliberate as he reached for a key in his coat pocket. "This," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "is what I left behind." He opened the box to reveal a collection of letters and sketches, each one carefully preserved. The sketches depicted moments of his life as a young boy, his struggles, his triumphs, and most poignantly, a portrait of Ellen smiling warmly, her eyes full of encouragement. Sarah's breath caught as she saw the depth of feeling in the drawings. William's words to Ellen in the letters were raw and heartfelt, expressing gratitude he had never been able to voice in person. Matteo, who had been standing silently by the door, stepped closer. He picked up one of the letters, his brow furrowing as he read. "You never told me about this," he said quietly. William sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I didn't know how. And by the time I thought I might, too much had passed between us." The vulnerability in William's voice seemed to strike a chord in Matteo. He placed the letter back in the box and turned to his father. "You should have, but maybe it's not too late." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. William looked at his son, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "No," he said softly. "It's not." The drive back to the mansion was quieter than before, but the silence felt different, less heavy, more contemplative. Sarah sat in the back seat, holding the box on her lap. She felt like an observer in a story that was still unfolding, its ending uncertain but filled with possibilities. That evening, as they gathered in the sitting room, Matteo turned to Sarah. "Thank you," he said simply, "for all of this." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "You're welcome." As she looked at William and Matteo, she saw the beginnings of a bridge, fragile but real, and she knew that whatever lay ahead, they were finally moving forward, one step at a time. The Hertford mansion felt unusually quiet the morning after their return from Brimfield. The echoes of their shared experience hung in the air, delicate and unresolved. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea as she replayed the events of the previous day. The box of William's letters and sketches now rested on his desk, a tangible reminder of a past that was slowly being unearthed. Elise entered the kitchen, her sharp eyes softening when she saw Sarah's pensive expression. "I thought I might find you here," Elise said, setting a plate of toast down in front of her. "You look like someone with a lot on her mind." Sarah smiled faintly. "I suppose I am. Yesterday was significant." Elise nodded knowingly. Brimfield was a place of beginnings for Mr. Hertford. Perhaps it's fitting that it might also be a place of reconciliation. Sarah's thoughts turned to William and Matteo. While the trip had opened the door to understanding, the wounds between them were far from healed. There was still so much left unsaid, and Sarah couldn't help but wonder if they would find the courage to confront the deeper truths that lay between them. Later that morning, Sarah found William in his study, gazing at the box from Brimfield. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting warm light across his lined face. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "Come to check on the old man again?" he asked, a hint of humor in his tone. "I came to see how you're feeling," Sarah replied, pulling up a chair across from him. "Yesterday was a big step." William nodded slowly. "It was, but it feels like just a start. Matteo and I have a long way to go." "That's true," Sarah agreed, "but at least you're moving in the right direction." He sighed, his gaze drifting to the sketches. "I never thought I'd see those again. They remind me of who I used to be. And who I might have been if things had gone differently." Sarah hesitated before speaking. "You still have time to be that person, William. It's never too late to change." William's lips quirked into a faint smile. "You sound like Ellen." "She believed in you," Sarah said softly, "and so do I." In the afternoon, Matteo appeared in the doorway of the study, his presence hesitant but deliberate. William looked up, surprised but pleased. "Matteo," he said, his voice warm, "come in." Matteo stepped inside, his hands shoved into his pockets. He glanced at the box on the desk before meeting his father's gaze. "I've been thinking about yesterday, about what it meant. William gestured for him to sit. "And what have you decided?" Matteo hesitated, his expression conflicted. "I don't know if I can forgive everything, but I want to try. I want to understand who you were back then, and maybe who you are now." William's eyes glistened, though he quickly looked away. "That's more than I deserve. Thank you." The sincerity in his voice seemed to reach Matteo, who nodded. "But there's something else I need to know. Why did you call me here now? What aren't you telling me?" The question hung in the air, heavy with expectation. Sarah, standing quietly in the corner, felt her chest tighten as William leaned back in his chair, his face shadowed with uncertainty. "There are things I need to set right," William said finally, "not just with you, but with the company, the family, everything. I've made mistakes, Matteo, and I don't want those mistakes to fall on you when I'm gone." Matteo's brows furrowed. "Oh, what kind of mistakes?" William glanced at Sarah before speaking, as if seeking her reassurance. "The company is in trouble. Paul's been handling the legal side, but there are issues. I need you to step in." Matteo stiffened, his expression guarded. "You want me to take over, after everything?" William nodded. "Not because I expect it, but because I believe you're the only one who can. You've always been more capable than I ever gave you credit for." Matteo leaned back in his chair, the weight of his father's words settling heavily on his shoulders. "I need time to think about this." "Of course," William said quietly. "Take all the time you need." That evening, Sarah found Matteo in the library, his shoulders slumped as he stared at a framed photograph on the mantel. It was a picture of him as a boy, sitting on his father's lap, both of them smiling. The image was a stark contrast to the tension that had defined their relationship for so many years. "I didn't know you kept this," Matteo said as Sarah approached. "I found it in a drawer," she admitted. "It seems your father held on to more than you realized." Matteo exhaled deeply. "He wants me to take over the company, but I'm not sure I want that responsibility. It feels like stepping into his shadow." "You don't have to become him," Sarah said gently. "You can lead in your own way." Matteo looked at her, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "What if I fail? What if I'm just repeating his mistakes?" "You won't," Sarah said firmly, "because you're already asking the right questions, and because you care." Matteo studied her for a moment before nodding. "Maybe you're right." As Sarah left the library, she felt a flicker of hope. The choices ahead for William and Matteo were daunting, but they were no longer facing them alone. And for the first time, it felt like the bridges they were building might just hold. The next morning, the Hartford mansion was filled with an unusual tension. Elise moved quietly through the halls, her expression more somber than usual. Sarah, sensing the weight of the previous day's revelations, sought solace in preparing William's medication and breakfast. As she carried the tray to his study, her mind churned with thoughts of the growing stakes for the family. William sat by the window, staring out at the grey skies that seemed to mirror his mood. His hand rested on the box from Brimfield, the contents still unpacked from the day before. When Sarah entered, he glanced at her, offering a faint nod of acknowledgement. "You seem distracted," she observed, setting the tray down on the table beside him. "Distracted doesn't quite capture it," he replied, his voice heavy. "Matteo is considering taking on the company. But it's not just the business. It's everything tied to it. Years of mistakes, of choices I thought were right at the time." Sarah sat across from him, her expression gentle but firm. "You're giving him a chance to choose his own path. That's more than you had." William considered this, his lips pressing into a thin line. "I just hope he can find a way to make it his own, not an extension of my failures." Before Sarah could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. Elise entered, her usual composure slightly shaken. "Paul is here," she announced. William sighed, his shoulders slumping. "Send him in." Paul entered the study moments later, his polished demeanor as impeccable as ever. His sharp suit and calm expression belied the tension in his eyes. "William," Paul began, his tone neutral, "I've reviewed the documents you requested. There are complications." William gestured for him to continue. "Let's have it." Paul hesitated, his gaze shifting briefly to Sarah before returning to William. "Some of the company's holdings are being contested by an outside party. It's a legal matter, but it has the potential to escalate. If Matteo is to take over, he'll need to make decisions quickly, decisions that could determine the future of the Hartford name." William's jaw tightened. "And what do you recommend?" "I recommend a strategic partnership to stabilize the situation," Paul said. "It would require Matteo's immediate involvement." The words hung in the air, and Sarah felt a pang of unease. Paul's suggestion seemed practical, but there was an undercurrent of urgency that didn't sit well with her. "I'll speak with Matteo," William said after a long pause. "But this needs to be handled carefully." Paul inclined his head. "Of course. I'm here to ensure the best outcome for everyone." As Paul left the room, Sarah turned to William. "Do you trust him?" William's eyes narrowed slightly. "Paul has been with me for years. He knows the business inside and out." "That's not what I asked," Sarah said quietly. William didn't respond immediately, his gaze drifting back to the window. "Trust is a luxury I've learned to live without, Sarah." Later that afternoon, Sarah found Matteo in the library, pacing between the shelves. He looked up as she entered, his expression clouded. "Paul spoke to me," he said without preamble. "He mentioned the contested holdings. He also implied that if I don't step in now, the company could fall apart." Sarah folded her arms, her concern growing. "What do you think?" Matteo sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. Part of me feels obligated, like I owe it to the family, but another part of me wonders if this is just another way to get trapped in his shadow." "You don't owe anyone your future, Matteo," Sarah said firmly, "but if you take this on, do it because it's what you want, not because you feel pressured." He met her gaze, his expression softening. "You always seem to know the right thing to say." "It's easier from the outside," Sarah admitted with a faint smile. "But you're not alone in this. You have your father and you have me." Matteo's jaw tightened, his eyes filled with an emotion Sarah couldn't quite place. "What if I make the wrong choice?" "Then you'll learn from it," Sarah said simply, "and you'll keep going." That evening, Elise approached Sarah in the kitchen, her expression troubled. "I overheard something," she began, her voice low. "Paul was speaking to someone on the phone. He mentioned leveraging the contested holdings to consolidate his own position." Sarah's stomach sank. "You think he's trying to use this situation for his own gain?" Elise nodded. "It's not the first time I've had doubts about him, but this feels different, more calculated." Sarah's mind raced. If Paul's intentions were as self-serving as Elise suggested, then the stakes were even higher than she'd realized. Matteo's decision could have far-reaching consequences, not just for the company, but for the family's legacy. That night, Sarah found herself in William's study once more. The fire burned low in the hearth, casting long shadows across the room. William looked up as she entered, his expression weary. "We need to talk about Paul," Sarah said, her voice steady. "Elise overheard something that concerns me." She relayed Elise's suspicions, watching as William's jaw tightened. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, his eyes dark with thought. "Paul has always been ambitious," William said finally, "but if what you're saying is true, then he's crossed a line." "What will you do?" Sarah asked. William exhaled heavily. "I'll confront him, but first I need to speak with Matteo. He deserves to know the full picture before he makes his choice." As Sarah left the study, she felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The threads of trust and betrayal were woven tightly through the Hartford family's story, and unraveling them would take more courage than any of them had yet shown. But for the first time, Sarah saw a glimmer of hope, not just for William and Matteo, but for the possibility of a future built on something stronger than the shadows of the past. The tension in the Hartford mansion was palpable the next morning. The delicate threads of trust and reconciliation between William and Matteo seemed ready to snap under the weight of the decisions looming over them. Sarah, ever the anchor in their turbulent world, felt the pressure too, but she resolved to keep steady. She found solace in action, helping Elise prepare breakfast and ensuring William's morning routine was seamless. By mid-morning, William called for Matteo to join him in the study. Sarah lingered just outside, unsure if her presence was welcome, but ready to intervene if needed. The heavy oak doors muffled their voices, but she could hear the low timbre of their conversation, punctuated by occasional sharp tones. When Matteo emerged, his face was a storm of emotion, frustration, determination, and something deeper, harder to place. He spotted Sarah in the corridor and walked straight to her. "He wants me to step into the company immediately," Matteo said, his voice tight. "He says it's the only way to save it." Sarah searched his face, her heart aching at the conflict she saw there. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know," he admitted, his shoulders slumping. "It feels like a trap, like I'll be cleaning up his mess for the rest of my life." "Maybe you will," Sarah said gently, "but maybe it's also a chance to build something different. Something that's yours." Matteo frowned, his gaze dropping to the floor. "And if I fail?" "You won't," she said firmly. "And even if things don't go as planned, you'll have done it on your terms." Matteo didn't respond immediately, but Sarah could see her words sinking in, planting seeds of resolve. That evening, William requested a family dinner in the formal dining room, a rarity in recent years. The long table, usually a symbol of the distance between them, was now an opportunity for connection. Elise had outdone herself, preparing a meal that felt both celebratory and nostalgic. As they sat down, the atmosphere was tense, but not hostile. William cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "I've asked you both here tonight because I have something important to say," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Matteo, I've made many mistakes, too many to count, and while I can't undo them, I want to do what I can to make things right." Matteo's expression remained guarded, but he nodded, signaling for his father to continue. "I've decided to step away from the company completely," William said. "Not because I have to, but because I want to. It's time for new leadership, leadership that reflects the future, not the past." Matteo's brow furrowed. "And you think that should be me?" "I do," William said simply, "but only if you want it. If you choose to walk away, I'll respect that. But if you choose to stay, I'll support you in building something that's truly yours." The room fell silent, the weight of William's words settling over them like a heavy blanket. Sarah watched as Matteo wrestled with the decision, his internal battle playing out in the flicker of emotions across his face. "I need time to think," Matteo said finally, his voice quiet but firm. "Take all the time you need," William replied, his tone gentle. After dinner, Sarah found Matteo in the sitting room, staring into the fire. She sat down beside him, waiting for him to speak first. "It's not just the company," Matteo said after a long pause. "It's everything that comes with it, the legacy, the expectations. I don't know if I can carry all of that." "You don't have to carry it alone," Sarah said softly. "Your father believes in you, even if he hasn't always shown it, and so do I." Matteo turned to her, his eyes searching hers. "Why do you care so much?" Sarah hesitated, then spoke with quiet conviction. Because I've seen what happens when people let their past define them. And I believe you can do more than that. You can build something better. Matteo exhaled deeply, his tension easing slightly. You make it sound so simple. It's not, Sarah admitted, but it's worth it. The next morning, Matteo approached William in the study. Sarah lingered nearby, unable to resist eavesdropping. She heard the low rumble of Matteo's voice, firm but calm. "I'll do it," Matteo said. "But on my terms." William's response was too quiet for her to hear, but the relief in his tone was unmistakable. As Sarah walked away, she felt a surge of hope. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, it felt like they were all moving towards something brighter. The decision Matteo had made lingered in the air like a charged storm cloud. While it was a relief to William that his son had chosen to step into the company, the road ahead was fraught with complexities that neither of them fully understood yet. Sarah, observing the family dynamics unfold, felt both hope and trepidation. There was a sense that something significant was shifting, though its ultimate direction remained unclear. The morning began with an emergency meeting in the study. Paul arrived earlier than usual, his polished demeanor masking the urgency of the situation. Matteo joined his father at the long table, his presence commanding yet restrained. Sarah stayed nearby, ready to step in should William's health require attention, but also unable to quell her curiosity about the unfolding events. "There's a pressing issue with the contested holdings," Paul began, placing a stack of papers in front of Matteo. "The outside party has filed a formal legal challenge, claiming a breach in the original agreements. If this isn't addressed immediately, it could destabilize the entire foundation of Hartford Enterprises." Matteo scanned the documents, his brow furrowing. "And your recommendation?" Paul hesitated, his gaze shifting between William and Matteo. "To sell the contested assets. It would stabilize the company and remove the threat entirely." William's eyes narrowed. Those assets were integral to the company's growth. Selling them would be like cutting off a limb. Matteo glanced at his father. "Would it save the company?" Paul nodded. "Yes, but it would change the company's direction significantly. It's not an easy decision." William's expression hardened, his pride clearly at war with practicality. "It's a short-term solution to a long-term problem. And if we don't," Matteo pressed. "The company risks a hostile takeover," Paul said simply. The weight of the words sank in, leaving an uneasy silence. That afternoon, Sarah found Elise in the kitchen, her usually composed demeanor tinged with frustration. Elise was chopping vegetables with a little more force than necessary, her movements sharp and deliberate. "Elise," Sarah began carefully, "is something bothering you?" Elise paused, her hands stilling over the cutting board. She let out a sigh. "I've been observing Paul for years. He's always been ambitious, but now it feels like he's playing a game. One where the stakes are higher than he's letting on." Sarah frowned. "Do you think he's hiding something?" Elise nodded. "He's too eager to push the sale of those holdings. It doesn't sit right with me." Sarah's mind raced. If Elise's instincts were correct, Paul's motivations might not align with the family's best interests. She resolved to bring her concerns to Matteo, knowing that he would need every piece of information to make the right decision. That evening, Sarah found Matteo in the library, poring over the documents Paul had given him. He looked up as she entered, exhaustion etched into his features. "You look like you've been at this all day," Sarah said softly. "I have," Matteo admitted, "and I'm no closer to figuring out the right answer." Sarah sat down across from him. "Elise thinks Paul has his own agenda. She's noticed things, patterns in his behavior. It might be worth looking into." Matteo leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. Great. Another layer of complications. You're not in this alone, Sarah reminded him, and you don't have to make this decision tonight. Matteo met her gaze, his expression softening. It feels like I do. If I make the wrong call, it could ruin everything. Sarah reached out, placing a reassuring hand on his. You're trying, Matteo. That's what matters. And you'll make the right decision when the time comes. The next morning, Matteo confronted Paul in the study. Sarah stood just outside, listening as their voices rose and fell. Why are you pushing so hard for the sale? Matteo demanded, his tone sharp. Paul's response was measured but defensive. Because it's the only viable option. The company's survival depends on it. And what about your survival? Matteo countered. What's in it for you? Paul's silence spoke volumes, and Matteo's suspicion deepened. I'll make my own decision, Paul, and I suggest you start being more transparent if you want to remain involved. When Matteo emerged from the study, he looked shaken but resolute. Sarah approached him cautiously. What happened? She asked. I think Paul's been maneuvering for his own benefit, Matteo admitted, but I can't prove it yet. What will you do? Sarah pressed. I'll make the decision that's best for the company, Matteo said firmly, even if it means going against him. That evening, Matteo joined William for dinner, the atmosphere between them heavy but not hostile. As the meal progressed, Matteo finally broke the silence. I'm going to sell the holdings, he said quietly. It's not what I want, but it's what the company needs. William nodded slowly, his expression pained but understanding. It's a hard choice, but sometimes those are the ones that matter most. Sarah watched from the doorway, her heart aching for both of them. The sacrifices they were making weren't just about the company, they were about preserving something larger, something more intangible. As the evening wore on, Sarah found herself reflecting on the strength it took to make such decisions. Matteo and William were learning to navigate the complexities of their relationship and their legacy, and while the path ahead was uncertain, they were facing it together. For the first time, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope that they might just succeed. The mansion was cloaked in a subdued stillness the morning after Matteo's decision to sell the contested holdings. Sarah moved through the halls, carrying a tray of tea for William. As she approached his study, she noticed the door slightly ajar and paused, her ears catching the low timbre of a conversation. Inside, William sat with Elise, his expression grave as she spoke. Paul has been exploiting your trust for years, William. The signs were there, but I didn't want to believe it. Now, I'm certain he's manipulating this situation for his own gain. William leaned back in his chair, his face a mixture of anger and weariness. If what you're saying is true, then he's been using my company and my illness to position himself. Elise nodded. You need to confront him before Matteo finalizes the sale. If Paul's motives are self-serving, this could undermine everything you're trying to rebuild. Sarah stepped into the room, her presence unnoticed until William turned toward her. You heard? He asked. I did, she admitted, and Elise is right. Paul's behavior has been suspicious for a while now. William sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. Then I'll need to handle this carefully. Matteo can't make an informed decision without knowing the full extent of Paul's intentions. Later that day, Sarah sought out Matteo, finding him in the library, surrounded by stacks of legal documents. His shoulders were tense, and the lines of fatigue etched into his face were more pronounced than ever. You're carrying too much, Sarah said gently as she approached. It's not just about the company, is it? Matteo looked up at her, his eyes filled with a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. No, it's not. There's something I've been avoiding, Sarah, something I need to tell you. She sat down across from him, her heart pounding with the weight of his words. "I'm listening." Matteo hesitated, his hands fidgeting with a pen on the desk. "Years ago there was an accident. A construction project I was overseeing for Hartford Enterprises. One of the workers was injured, badly. It was a mistake in the plans, something I should have caught. But instead of taking responsibility, my father covered it up. He paid off the worker and ensured the story never saw the light of day." Sarah's breath caught. "And you've been carrying that guilt ever since?" Matteo nodded, his voice heavy. "I wanted to come clean, but he wouldn't let me. He said it would ruin my career and the company's reputation. I've resented him for it ever since, but the truth is, I let it happen." Sarah reached out, placing a hand on his. "You were young, Matteo, and it sounds like you wanted to do the right thing, even if you didn't know how." Matteo's gaze met hers, vulnerability flickering in his eyes. "Maybe. But now, I can't help but wonder if stepping into the company will just drag me back into that darkness." "You have a choice," Sarah said firmly. "You can lead with integrity, make things right. You don't have to follow in your father's footsteps." That evening, William called for a meeting in the sitting room. Matteo, Sarah, and Elise gathered around the fireplace, the air thick with unspoken tension. William sat in his chair, the lines on his face deepened by the weight of what he was about to say. "I've been blind," William began, his voice steady but strained. "Paul has been manipulating me and this family for years." Elise confirmed it, "And now I see the pattern. He's pushing for the sale of those holdings to secure his own position, not to protect the company." Matteo's jaw tightened, his anger barely restrained. "And you're just realizing this now?" William flinched but nodded. "I should have seen it earlier. I should have stopped it before it got this far. But I was too focused on maintaining control, even when I knew I was losing my grip." Matteo stood, his frustration spilling over. "You didn't just lose your grip, Dad. You put everything at risk. My career, the company, this family. And for what? To protect your pride." William looked down, his voice quieter now. "You're right. I failed you. I failed this family, but I'm trying to make it right." The room fell silent, the weight of William's confession hanging over them. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice calm but firm. "This isn't just about the past. It's about what you both do next." Matteo turned to her, his expression softening slightly. "What do you suggest?" "You confront Paul," Sarah said. "Together. If he's been acting against the family's interests, you need to remove him before he does more damage." William nodded. "I agree, but it has to be done carefully. He knows too much about the company, and if we act rashly, it could backfire." Matteo's gaze shifted between Sarah and his father before he finally nodded. "Then let's do it." The confrontation took place the next morning. Paul arrived at the mansion, his polished demeanor intact, but his eyes betraying a flicker of unease. William and Matteo were waiting for him in the study, their united front a stark contrast to the fractured relationship they'd shared only weeks before. As the conversation unfolded, Paul's composure began to crack under the weight of their accusations. He denied the allegations at first, but when Matteo presented evidence, a trail of questionable transactions and communications, Paul's defenses crumbled. "You don't understand," Paul said desperately. "I was trying to protect the company, to ensure its survival." "By lining your own pockets," Matteo shot back, his voice cold. William, his tone calmer but no less firm, added, "You betrayed this family, Paul. And for that, you're finished here." Paul's departure was swift and unceremonious, leaving the Hartford family with a mix of relief and lingering uncertainty. As the study door closed behind him, William turned to Matteo, his expression resolute. "You did well today," William said. "Better than I could have." Matteo nodded, his jaw set. "We're not done yet, but this was a start." Sarah, standing quietly in the corner, felt a swell of hope. The darkness of the past was beginning to lift, and for the first time, the Hartford family seemed poised to move forward. Not perfectly, but together. The morning after Paul's departure, the Hartford mansion felt different, lighter, yet charged with the anticipation of what was to come. Removing Paul from their lives had been a necessary step, but the challenges ahead were no less daunting. Matteo had spent most of the night reviewing company documents, his determination tempered by the weight of his newfound responsibility. Sarah, as always, remained a quiet presence of support, though she sensed the brewing tension beneath the surface. She found Matteo in the library, poring over a set of contracts. His dark hair was disheveled, and a steaming mug of coffee sat untouched beside him. "You need to take a break," Sarah said gently, stepping into the room. Matteo looked up, exhaustion evident in his eyes. "There's too much to do. The fallout from Paul's actions is worse than I thought. Untangling it all will take months." "Then pace yourself," Sarah said, pulling up a chair beside him. "You can't fix everything in one night or one day." Matteo leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "It's not just the company. It's the legacy, the expectations. I don't want to become what my father was, but I don't know how to lead without following his shadow." Sarah reached for the untouched coffee, nudging it toward him. "You lead by being yourself, by making decisions that reflect your values, not his." Matteo studied her for a moment, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them. "You always seem to know what to say." "Someone has to," Sarah teased lightly, though her tone carried genuine warmth. Later that day, William requested a private conversation with Matteo in the study. Sarah, sensing the significance of the moment, stayed behind in the sitting room with Elise. The housekeeper, usually composed and reserved, seemed uncharacteristically restless. "Do you think they'll finally get through to each other?" Elise asked, breaking the silence. "I think they're trying," Sarah replied. "And that's more than they've done in years." Elise nodded, her expression softening. "It's remarkable what you've done for them. This family was falling apart, and now there's a chance." "It's not just me," Sarah said. "They're both making the effort. That's what really matters." Inside the study, William and Matteo sat across from each other, the weight of their shared history pressing heavily upon them. William cleared his throat, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "I owe you an explanation," he began, "about why I made the choices I did." Matteo leaned back, crossing his arms. "I'm listening." William exhaled deeply. "When I was your age, I thought success meant building something indestructible. I sacrificed everything, relationships, happiness, even my integrity, to chase that dream. And when I realized the cost, it was too late to undo the damage." Matteo's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, allowing his father to continue. "I've spent the last few years watching it all crumble," William admitted, "and it's my fault. But seeing you step up, seeing the strength and integrity you've shown, it gives me hope that maybe we can rebuild, that maybe you can build something better." Matteo's expression softened, though his voice remained steady. "I don't want to be like you, Dad. I want to lead differently. And you should," William said firmly. "You're not me, Matteo, and that's a good thing." For the first time, a flicker of understanding passed between them. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was a step toward healing. That evening, Sarah found William in his study, staring at the box of letters and sketches from Brimfield. He looked up as she entered, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You've done a lot for this family," he said, "more than we deserve." "I haven't done anything you couldn't have done yourselves," Sarah replied, sitting down across from him. "You just needed someone to remind you how." William chuckled softly. Ellen would have liked you. She always believed in the power of connection, in seeing the best in people. She passed that belief on to me, Sarah said, her voice quiet but steady. And I think she'd be proud of what you're doing now. William nodded, his expression reflective. I hope so, for her sake and for Matteo's. In the days that followed, the Hartford family began to find a new rhythm. Matteo, with Sarah's encouragement, took his first steps as the company's leader, navigating the complexities of his role with growing confidence. William, though physically frailer, seemed lighter in spirit, his pride in his son evident in the way he spoke of him. One evening, Matteo surprised Sarah by asking her to join him for a walk in the garden. The air was crisp, and the setting sun cast a warm glow over the estate. I don't think I've thanked you properly, Matteo said as they strolled along the frost-kissed paths. For everything you've done, for me, for my father. You don't have to thank me, Sarah replied. I'm just glad I could help. Matteo stopped, turning to face her. You've done more than help. You've reminded me that it's possible to rebuild, to move forward. That means more than you know. Sarah felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. You've done the hard work, Matteo. I've just been here to support you. And that's enough, he said, his voice soft but resolute. As they continued their walk, Sarah felt a sense of quiet fulfillment. The barriers that had once divided the Hartford family were beginning to crumble, replaced by something stronger and more enduring. And though the path ahead was still uncertain, they were facing it together, with hope, resilience, and a newfound belief in the power of second chances. The Hartford mansion, with its grand yet somber architecture, felt more alive than it had in years. The atmosphere buzzed with a tentative energy, a mixture of hope and uncertainty. William's health, though deteriorating, seemed steadied by the emotional progress between him and Matteo, and for Sarah, the shifts in their dynamic were both heartening and bittersweet. William had requested a family dinner, one that would include not only Matteo, but also the staff who had been by his side for decades. Elise bustled about the kitchen, her usually reserved demeanor tinged with a nervous excitement. This dinner means a lot to him, Elise confided to Sarah as they prepared the evening's courses. He's never been good at expressing himself, but this is his way of showing gratitude. Sarah nodded, her heart warming at the thought. He's come a long way. You all have. By the time the table was set, the dining room glowed with soft candlelight, and the aroma of roasted meats and freshly baked bread filled the air. As everyone took their seats, William, seated at the head of the table, raised his glass with a trembling hand. I wanted to thank you all, he began, his voice steady but laden with emotion, for standing by me, even when I didn't deserve it. For reminding me of what truly matters. His gaze lingered on Matteo, who sat to his right, to my son, for having the courage to step into the unknown and make it your own. I see more of your mother in you every day, and I couldn't be prouder. Matteo's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard, nodding silently. The room fell into a reverent silence, each person absorbing the weight of William's words. After the dinner plates were cleared, William motioned for Sarah to join him in the study. The fire burned low, casting flickering shadows across the walls. He gestured to the chair beside him, and Sarah sat, sensing he had something important to say. You've been a guiding light in this house, William said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. You've done more than care for me. You've helped me see what I've been too blind to face for years. I only helped you find what was already there, Sarah replied gently. William shook his head, his gaze fixed on the fire. It wasn't there. Not until you showed me it could be. I was so consumed by my own mistakes that I forgot there was still time to make things right. He reached for a small velvet box on the table beside him, holding it out to her. This belonged to Ellen. She gave it to me when I left Brimfield, and I've carried it with me ever since. I think she would want you to have it." Sarah's hands trembled as she took the box, opening it to reveal a delicate gold locket. Inside was a photograph of Ellen as a young woman, her face radiating the warmth and strength that Sarah had always admired. "She believed in me," William continued, his voice breaking, "and now I see that she believed in you too. Thank you for being her legacy." Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she clutched the locket to her chest. "I'll treasure it," she whispered. The next morning, Sarah found Matteo in the garden, his breath visible in the crisp winter air. He was pacing along the frosted paths, his hands shoved into his coat pockets. When he saw her, he stopped, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Walk with me," he asked. She nodded, falling into step beside him. They walked in silence for a while, the crunch of their footsteps the only sound. "My father surprised me last night," Matteo said finally. "I didn't think he had it in him to say those things." "He's trying," Sarah replied, "and so are you." Matteo stopped, turning to face her. "You've been the glue holding us together, Sarah. I don't know how we would have gotten here without you." "You give me too much credit," Sarah said, though her heart swelled at his words. "This was always in you both. You just needed a reason to find it." His gaze held hers, warm and unguarded. "You've given us more than a reason. You've given us hope." The sincerity in his voice left Sarah momentarily speechless. As they resumed their walk, she felt a flicker of something new between them, a connection that was no longer just professional, but deeply personal. That evening, as the family and staff gathered in the sitting room for coffee and dessert, William made another announcement. "I want us to have one last celebration," he said, "something to mark a new beginning for this family." Matteo glanced at him, curiosity in his eyes. "What kind of celebration?" "A dinner," William said, "to bring everyone together, family, friends, those who've stood by us." "I want this house to be filled with life again," Sarah smiled, her heart warmed by the idea. "That sounds wonderful." As plans for the dinner began to take shape, Sarah reflected on how far they had all come. The barriers that had once seemed insurmountable were slowly being replaced by bridges of understanding and forgiveness. And while the road ahead was still uncertain, they were finally moving forward, together. For Sarah, the journey was far from over, but in that moment she allowed herself to feel the quiet joy of progress. She held Ellen's locket close, a symbol of the strength and compassion that had brought them to this point. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always the possibility of light. The days leading up to William's proposed dinner were a whirlwind of activity. Elise coordinated the preparations with precision, her years of managing the Hartford household evident in every detail. The staff worked tirelessly to polish silverware, arrange flowers, and prepare a menu befitting the significance of the occasion. Sarah, though drawn into the preparations, spent much of her time with William, whose energy seemed to wane with each passing day. One afternoon, as Sarah adjusted the cushions on his chair, William gestured toward the journal resting on the nearby table. "Read to me," he said softly, "from the parts about Ellen." Sarah hesitated, surprised by the request. "Are you sure?" "I need to hear it," he replied, his voice tinged with both resolve and vulnerability. She opened the journal, her fingers brushing the worn pages as she began to read. The entries were raw and heartfelt, chronicling William's struggles and the encouragement Ellen had given him during his darkest moments. Her words of faith in his abilities resonated even now, decades later. "She saw something in me that I didn't," William said when Sarah paused, "and I've spent my life trying to live up to that vision." "You've done more than you realize," Sarah said gently. You've given that same hope to Matteo, even if it took time to show it. William's gaze softened, a flicker of gratitude in his tired eyes. I only hope it's enough. The evening of the dinner arrived, bringing with it a palpable sense of anticipation. Guests began to trickle in, their laughter and conversation filling the grand halls. The dining room, bathed in the warm glow of candlelight, had been transformed into a space of celebration and connection. William, seated at the head of the table, greeted each guest with a mixture of warmth and dignity. Matteo stood by his side, his presence both reassuring and commanding. Sarah, watching from the doorway, felt a swell of pride for both men. They had come so far, and tonight was a testament to their efforts. As the dinner progressed, William raised his glass for a toast. His voice, though weakened, carried the strength of his emotions. "To family," he began, his gaze sweeping over the table. "To friends, and to the people who remind us of what truly matters. This house has seen its share of challenges, but tonight it is filled with the light of hope and reconciliation. Thank you all for being here, for being part of this journey." The room erupted in applause, and Sarah couldn't help but smile. It was a moment she would carry with her forever. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and the house had quieted, William called for Sarah and Matteo to join him in the study. The fire burned low, casting flickering shadows across the room. William sat in his chair, his expression contemplative. "I've been thinking about legacies," he said, his voice steady but reflective, "about the things we leave behind." Matteo sat across from him, his posture attentive. "What about them?" William gestured toward the desk, where a stack of documents rested. "There's a project I want you to take on, Matteo. Something I started but never had the courage to finish." Matteo picked up the top document, scanning its contents. His eyes widened as he read. "This is about education, about creating scholarships and funding schools." William nodded. "Ellen's belief in me changed my life. I want to honor that by giving others the same chance." Matteo looked at his father, a mix of admiration and determination in his eyes. "I'll do it." Sarah, standing quietly by the window, felt tears prick her eyes. It was a fitting tribute to Ellen's legacy, and to the transformation that had taken place within the Hartford family. As the night wore on, Sarah stayed with William, who seemed unusually quiet. He held Ellen's locket in his hand, his gaze distant. "Do you think she'd be proud of me?" he asked suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah knelt beside him, her hand resting gently on his arm. "I know she would be. She believed in you, William, and so do I." For the first time, William's composure cracked, and tears slid down his cheeks. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking, "for everything." Sarah stayed with him until he drifted off to sleep, her heart heavy with both sorrow and gratitude. The path they had walked together had been long and fraught with challenges, but it had also been filled with moments of profound connection and healing. And as she looked out at the snow-covered garden, the stars shining brightly above, she felt a deep sense of peace. The Hartford family had found their way back to each other, and in doing so, had created a legacy of love and redemption that would endure for generations to come. The days following the dinner were quiet, as if the house itself were catching its breath after the weighty emotions of the gathering. William, though visibly weaker, seemed content. His moments of reflection grew longer, his conversations with Matteo deeper. For Sarah, the stillness was both a relief and a reminder of the fragility of the connections they had built. One cold morning, Sarah found Matteo in the study, bent over a stack of documents. His brow was furrowed, his pen hovering above the page, as if the decision before him was too heavy to commit to paper. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked, stepping into the room. Matteo looked up, the lines of stress evident on his face. "It's about the education initiative my father wanted me to take on. There's a way to fund it, but it means selling off a significant portion of the company's assets. Assets that have defined Hartford Enterprises for decades." Sarah sat across from him, her gaze steady. "What would happen if you sold them?" Matteo leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. "It would change everything. The company would be smaller, leaner, but it would also be more focused on people, on community. It's the kind of legacy I want to leave behind." "But," Sarah prompted gently. "But it would mean walking away from everything my father built," Matteo admitted, "and I don't know if he's ready for that." Sarah reached out, her hand brushing his. "This isn't just about your father's legacy, Matteo. It's about yours. What kind of leader do you want to be?" Matteo looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of uncertainty and determination. "I want to build something meaningful, something I can be proud of." "Then trust yourself," Sarah said. "You're stronger than you think." Later that day, Matteo approached William, who was resting in the sitting room, a blanket draped over his lap. Sarah watched from the doorway, her heart pounding as Matteo sat beside his father. "Dad," Matteo began, his voice measured, "we need to talk about the company, about the future." William's eyes narrowed slightly, though his expression remained calm. "What's on your mind?" Matteo took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I've been thinking about the education initiative. It's the right thing to do, but funding it means selling off a large portion of the company's assets. It would change Hartford Enterprises forever." William was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the fire. "And you think that's what's best?" "I do," Matteo said firmly, "but I won't move forward unless you're on board." William's lips twitched into a faint smile. "You're asking for my blessing?" "No," Matteo replied. "I'm asking for your trust." William chuckled softly, though it quickly turned into a cough. "You've earned it, son. Do what you think is right. Build something that matters." Matteo nodded, his jaw tightening as he fought back emotion. "Thank you." That evening, Sarah found Matteo in the garden, staring up at the stars. The cold air turned his breath into faint clouds, but he didn't seem to notice. She approached quietly, her footsteps crunching on the frost-kissed grass. "You made your decision," she said softly. "I did," Matteo replied, "and for the first time, I feel like I'm stepping out of his shadow." Sarah smiled, her chest swelling with pride. "He's proud of you, Matteo. You know that, right?" Matteo turned to her, his gaze filled with warmth. "Maybe, but it's you who gave me the courage to do this." "You always had the courage," Sarah said. "You just needed someone to remind you." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their journey settling around them. Then Matteo reached out, his hand brushing hers. "Thank you, Sarah, for everything." Her heart fluttered at the sincerity in his voice, and she squeezed his hand gently. "It's been my privilege." As the days passed, plans for the company's transformation began to take shape. Matteo worked tirelessly, his vision for a more inclusive, community-focused enterprise, inspiring those around him. William, though too frail to actively participate, listened attentively as Matteo shared his ideas, pride evident in his every word. One evening, as Sarah prepared William's tea, he motioned for her to sit beside him. "There's one more thing I need to do," he said, his voice soft but resolute. "I want to leave something for you." "For me?" Sarah asked, surprised. William nodded. "You've been more than a nurse, Sarah. You've been a light in this house. I want to ensure you can continue shining, wherever life takes you." Tears pricked Sarah's eyes, but she shook her head. "You've already given me more than I could ever ask for, William." "Humor an old man," he said with a faint smile. "This is something I need to do," Sarah stayed with him long into the night, their conversation filled with gratitude, memories, and the quiet understanding that their time together was drawing to a close. The Hertford mansion, once a symbol of isolation, now pulsed with the energy of transformation. Matteo's leadership was already beginning to leave its mark, and William's vision for a better future was becoming a reality. And for Sarah, the journey she had embarked on when she first stepped through the mansion's doors had given her more than she could have ever imagined. As she stood by the window, Ellen's locket resting against her chest, Sarah felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The weight of their choices had been heavy, but the bonds they had forged were stronger. And in the quiet of the night, she allowed herself to hope for the Hertford family, for their legacy, and for the possibilities that lay ahead. The crisp winter air wrapped itself around the Hertford mansion, its cold, sharp, but invigorating. The house, once shrouded in silence and heavy with unspoken regrets, now carried a different energy. Laughter echoed faintly from the kitchen, where Elise was instructing a younger staff member on perfecting the evening's dessert. In the study, the soft rustle of papers spoke of plans in motion, plans to honor William's vision while carving out a new path under Matteo's leadership. Sarah, however, found herself drawn to the garden. The snow-dappled paths glistened under the pale sunlight, and the skeletal trees stood like quiet sentinels. She walked slowly, her thoughts circling around the transformation she had witnessed in this family and in herself. Inside the study, William sat in his chair, the fire's warmth casting a soft glow over his lined face. Matteo stood nearby, a document in hand. The two had spent hours that morning finalizing the details of the education initiative, a project that now bore Ellen Anderson's name. "I think she'd be proud," Matteo said, setting the paper on the desk. His voice carried a note of quiet reverence. William nodded, his gaze distant but content. She believed in the power of education, in giving people a chance to rise above their circumstances. This feels like the right way to honor her. Matteo sat across from his father, his posture relaxed in a way it hadn't been for years. "You've done a lot to make this happen, Dad. It's not just my project. It's yours too." William smiled faintly. "No, son. This is yours. You took the idea and gave it life. That's something I could never have done." The words, simple yet profound, carried a weight that only years of unspoken understanding could bear. Matteo nodded, his respect for his father evident in the way he held his gaze. That afternoon, Sarah returned to the house and found Elise in the sitting room polishing a silver tea set. The housekeeper glanced up, her expression softening. "You've been spending a lot of time in the garden lately," Elise remarked, her tone curious. "It's peaceful out there," Sarah replied, sitting down across from her, "and it gives me time to think." Elise set down the cloth, her hands stilling for a moment. "You've done so much for this family, Sarah, but I can't help but wonder, what will you do when your work here is done?" The question caught Sarah off guard. She had become so intertwined with the Hertford's journey that the thought of leaving felt distant and strange. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I do know that this place has changed me in ways I'm still figuring out." Elise nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Change is never easy, but it's often necessary, and I think you'll carry what you've built here with you, wherever you go." That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, the mood was warm and relaxed. William, though visibly tired, participated in the conversation with a quiet joy that hadn't been present in years. Matteo shared updates on the initiative, while Sarah listened, her heart swelling with pride for both father and son. As the meal wound down, William raised his glass, his hand trembling slightly but his voice steady. "To all of you for standing by me, for believing in this family, and for giving me the chance to leave this world better than I found it." The table fell silent, the weight of his words settling over them. Matteo raised his own glass, his voice firm and clear. "To you, Dad, for teaching me that it's never too late to change." The clink of glasses was followed by a soft murmur of agreement, and for a moment, everything felt right. Later, as Sarah helped William back to his room, he paused in the corridor, his hand resting lightly on her arm. "There's something I need to say," he began, his voice quieter now. Sarah waited, her heart aching at the vulnerability in his eyes. "You've been more than a caregiver," he said. "You've been a part of this family, and I don't think I could have done any of this without you." Tears pricked Sarah's eyes, but she managed to smile. "You've given me just as much, William. Being here has been a privilege." He nodded, his expression softening. "Thank you, Sarah, for everything." As she settled him into bed and dimmed the lights, Sarah lingered for a moment, watching the steady rise and fall of his breathing. The man who had once seemed so unreachable was now someone she deeply admired, and the thought of his absence left a hollow ache in her chest. That night, Sarah stood by the window in her room, Ellen's locket warm against her skin. The stars above the snow-covered grounds shone brightly, their light a reminder of the legacy she had helped to preserve. Whatever the future held, Sarah knew she would carry this family's story with her, a testament to the power of love, forgiveness, and the courage to change. The Hartford mansion, steeped in the chill of a late winter morning, was quiet. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, settling on the frost-covered grounds like whispered secrets. Inside, the warmth of the fireplace in William's study failed to mask the somber air that had settled over the household. There was an unspoken understanding among everyone. Time was slipping away. Sarah sat by William's side, the familiar sound of crackling logs filling the space between them. His breathing was slower now, labored but steady. He had asked her to read aloud from his journal, the entries a testament to a life that had seen both triumph and regret. "Read the part about Ellen," he said, his voice faint but firm. "It always brings me peace." Sarah nodded, her fingers brushing the worn pages as she found the passage. Her voice, soft yet steady, carried the weight of his words through the room. The entry spoke of Ellen's unwavering belief in him during his youth, her ability to see potential even when he could not. William's expression softened as she read, his eyes misting with emotion. "She saw the best in me," he murmured when she finished, "and for too long I failed to see it myself." "You've made amends, William," Sarah said gently. "You've honored her memory in ways that truly matter." He smiled faintly, his gaze drifting to the window. "And you've helped me see that it's never too late." Later that day, Matteo joined them in the study, carrying a stack of documents related to the education initiative. The project, now officially named the Ellen Anderson Foundation, had begun to take shape. Matteo had thrown himself into the work, channeling his grief and hope into something that would endure. "We finalized the first round of funding," Matteo said, sitting beside his father. "The scholarships will be ready by the fall." William's eyes brightened, a flicker of pride cutting through his exhaustion. "You've done something remarkable, son. Something Ellen would have been proud of." Matteo's voice softened. "I couldn't have done it without you. This was your vision." William shook his head weakly. "It's yours now, and I know you'll carry it forward." The room fell silent, the weight of their shared moment stretching into something sacred. Sarah watched from her chair, her heart swelling with both sorrow and admiration for the bond they had rebuilt. That evening, Elise prepared a quiet dinner, insisting on bringing a tray to William's room when he was too weak to join them at the table. Sarah, Matteo, and Elise ate together, the meal laced with gratitude and quiet reflection. "He's proud of you, Matteo," Elise said, her tone gentle but firm. You've given him peace. Matteo nodded, his jaw tightening as he blinked back tears. I just wish we'd had more time. Sarah reached across the table, placing a hand over his. You've given him more than time. You've given him hope. In the stillness of the night, Sarah found herself sitting by William's bedside. The locket Ellen had given him now rested in his hand, his fingers brushing the delicate gold as if drawing strength from its warmth. Sarah, he said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm here, she replied, leaning closer. I need you to promise me something, he said, his eyes locking onto hers. Take the locket with you when you leave. Carry her belief forward. Help others see what she saw. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, and she nodded. I promise. A faint smile touched William's lips, and his eyes drifted closed, his breathing growing shallower. Sarah stayed by his side, her hand resting lightly on his as the hours stretched into dawn. William Hartford passed away in the early hours of the morning, surrounded by the quiet strength of the legacy he had built. The mansion, once a symbol of isolation, now stood as a testament to the bonds of love and redemption that had transformed it. In the days that followed, the family came together to honor his memory. The Ellen Anderson Foundation became the centerpiece of their efforts, a living reminder of the values William had come to embody. Matteo took on his role with a newfound sense of purpose, his leadership marked by integrity and compassion. As Sarah prepared to leave the mansion, her work complete, Matteo found her in the garden. The snow had begun to melt, revealing patches of green beneath the frost. You're really leaving, Matteo said, his voice tinged with both sadness and gratitude. It's time, Sarah replied, smiling softly, but I'll carry all of this with me. Matteo reached into his pocket, pulling out an envelope. This is from my father. He asked me to give it to you. Sarah opened the envelope, finding a letter in William's handwriting. It was a message of thanks, a reminder of the impact she had made on their lives, and a wish for her to continue her journey with the same courage and kindness she had shown them. As she tucked the letter away, Matteo stepped closer. You'll always have a place here, Sarah. Don't forget that. She nodded, her heart full. Thank you, Matteo, for everything. As she walked down the long driveway, Ellen's locket resting against her heart, Sarah felt the weight of the past lifting. The road ahead was uncertain, but she carried with her the lessons of love, forgiveness, and the unshakable belief that it was never too late to change. The Hartford mansion stood quiet, its grand halls cloaked in a stillness that felt heavier without William's presence. The snow had begun to melt, revealing patches of brown earth beneath the frost, as if the world itself was slowly awakening from a long slumber. The days since William's passing had been marked by a mixture of grief and gratitude, a delicate balance of mourning what had been lost while honoring what he had left behind. Matteo had thrown himself into the work of the Ellen Anderson Foundation with an intensity that both impressed and worried Sarah. She often found him in the study, surrounded by papers and plans, his focus unwavering even as the toll of his father's death lingered in his eyes. One afternoon, she brought him a cup of tea, setting it down on the desk beside him. You need to take a break, she said gently. I can't, Matteo replied, not looking up. There's too much to do. Sarah sat across from him, her expression firm but kind. Pushing yourself to the brink won't honor your father's memory. He wanted you to carry this forward, yes, but not at the cost of yourself. Matteo finally looked at her, his shoulders sagging. It's just, everything feels so urgent now, like I have to prove that this matters, that it's worth all the sacrifices he made. It is worth it, Sarah said softly, but it's also worth taking care of yourself in the process. You're not alone in this, Matteo. Lean on the people who care about you. Her words seemed to reach him, and he nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You always know what to say." "Someone has to," she teased, echoing the words she'd said to him weeks before. Meanwhile, Elise had taken on the task of organizing William's personal effects. Her movements brisk, but tinged with a reverence that spoke to her decades of service in the household. Sarah joined her in William's room one morning, the two women working in companionable silence. As they sorted through a box of letters, Elise paused, holding up an envelope. "This one is addressed to you," she said, handing it to Sarah. Sarah's heart quickened as she took the envelope, her name written in William's familiar scrawl. She opened it carefully, unfolding the letter inside. "Sarah," it began. "If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there to say these words in person, but I want you to know how much you've meant to me, to this family. You gave us hope when we thought it was lost, and you reminded me that it's never too late to change. Carry that light with you, wherever life takes you, and never forget, you are part of this family now and always." Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she read, her chest tightening with a mix of sorrow and gratitude. She folded the letter carefully, tucking it into her pocket. "Thank you," she whispered, more to herself than to Elise. As the weeks passed, the mansion began to transform. What had once been a symbol of isolation now felt like a place of connection and purpose. Matteo held meetings with community leaders in the dining room. Their discussions focused on expanding the foundation's reach. Elise opened the kitchen to a group of volunteers who prepared meals for local families in need. Even the garden, once stark and lifeless, showed signs of renewal as new flowers were planted and old paths cleared. One evening, Matteo approached Sarah as she sat by the fire in the sitting room. He carried a folder under his arm, his expression serious but warm. "I want to show you something," he said, sitting beside her and opening the folder. Inside were architectural sketches and plans. "This is for the new community center. It'll be the hub for the foundation, educational programs, outreach initiatives, everything." Sarah studied the sketches, her heart swelling with pride. "It's incredible, Matteo. Your father would be so proud." Matteo's gaze softened. "It wouldn't have happened without you. You brought us back together, Sarah. You gave us the chance to rebuild. I just helped you see what was already there," she replied. "The rest was all you." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their journey settling around them. Then Matteo spoke again, his voice quieter. "You've become a part of this, Sarah. A part of us. I hope you know that." "I do," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And it's something I'll carry with me always." As spring approached, Sarah began to prepare for her departure. She had stayed longer than she'd planned, and though she felt deeply connected to the Hartfords, she knew it was time to move forward. Matteo insisted on organizing a small gathering to send her off, a gesture that both touched and overwhelmed her. The evening of the farewell came, and the dining room was filled with the people who had become her family: Matteo, Elise, the staff, and even a few community members who had been inspired by the foundation's work. Matteo stood to give a toast, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "To Sarah," he said, raising his glass, "for being the heart that brought us back to life. We'll miss you more than words can say, but we know you'll continue to shine wherever you go." As the glasses clinked and laughter filled the room, Sarah felt a profound sense of gratitude. The journey had been unexpected, but it had given her more than she could have imagined: a family, a purpose, and a renewed belief in the power of love and transformation. The next morning, as Sarah prepared to leave, Matteo walked her to the door. The early spring air was cool, and the first hints of green peeked through the snow. "I don't know how to say goodbye," Matteo admitted, his voice thick. Then don't, Sarah said, smiling through her tears. This isn't goodbye, Matteo. It's just until next time. He nodded, pulling her into a tight embrace. Take care of yourself, Sarah. And remember, you'll always have a place here. As she walked down the driveway, Ellen's locket warm against her chest, Sarah felt the weight of her journey lift. The Hartford family had found their way back to each other, and in doing so, they had given her the courage to move forward. The road ahead was unknown, but she carried with her the strength of the connections she had forged, and the unshakable belief that even the most broken things could be made whole again. The weeks following Sarah's departure from the Hartford mansion were marked by a slow but steady transformation. Matteo had fully embraced his role within the Ellen Anderson Foundation, dedicating himself to its growth and impact. Elise maintained the mansion with her usual quiet efficiency, but the warmth Sarah had brought to the home lingered in the hearts of everyone who remained. Despite the forward momentum, an unmistakable void hung over the household. Matteo, in particular, found himself thinking of Sarah often, her steadying presence, her wisdom, and the quiet strength she had brought to his family. It was on a crisp morning, with the first hints of summer in the air, that a letter arrived addressed to Matteo. The handwriting was neat and familiar, and his heart skipped as he opened it. Matteo, I hope this letter finds you well. Leaving the mansion was one of the hardest decisions I've made, but it felt right at the time. Still, I find myself thinking of you, of Elise, and of the incredible work you're doing. If there's ever a time you need me again, you know where to find me. With warmth, Sarah Matteo read the letter twice, then a third time before setting it down. For the first time in weeks, a genuine smile crossed his face. He folded the letter carefully, tucking it into his pocket before heading to the study to plan the next steps for the foundation. Meanwhile, Sarah had settled into a modest but peaceful home in a neighboring town. Her days were filled with new patients and fresh challenges, yet she couldn't shake the sense that her time with the Hartfords wasn't quite finished. She carried Ellen's locket with her, a tangible reminder of the legacy she had been part of, and she often caught herself glancing at it, wondering what the family was doing at that very moment. One afternoon, as she was tending to her small garden, a knock at the door startled her. She wiped her hands on her apron and opened the door to find Matteo standing there, his expression equal parts nervous and hopeful. "Matteo," she said, her voice a mixture of surprise and delight. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," he admitted, stepping forward. "Things have been going well, better than I could have imagined, but something's missing." Sarah tilted her head, her heart pounding. "And you think I'm the missing piece?" "I know you are," Matteo said simply. "You brought us back together, Sarah. You showed us what we could be. And I'm asking you to come back, not because we need you, but because we want you." Her breath caught, the sincerity in his words cutting through her uncertainty. She glanced past him, the open sky feeling both limitless and grounding. "I don't know if I can go back," she said softly. "It's hard to step into the same river twice." Matteo smiled faintly. "It's not the same river, Sarah, and we're not the same people. But I think there's still more for us to build, together." Sarah returned to the mansion a week later, her decision made after days of careful thought. Matteo greeted her at the door, his expression a mixture of relief and happiness. Elise, too, seemed lighter as she embraced Sarah, welcoming her back with the warmth of an old friend. The work awaiting Sarah was different this time, not as a caregiver, but as a collaborator. Matteo had envisioned a new role for her within the foundation, one that would allow her to channel her compassion and experience into outreach programs that expanded the foundation's reach. The mansion, once marked by loss and distance, now thrummed with purpose. Matteo and Sarah worked closely, their shared vision drawing them even closer than before. It wasn't long before their partnership began to grow into something deeper, though neither spoke of it directly. On a quiet evening, as they stood in the garden, Matteo finally broke the silence. "I'm glad you came back," he said, his voice soft. "So am I," Sarah replied, her gaze meeting his. "I think I needed to." "Maybe we both did," Matteo said, a smile tugging at his lips. As the stars began to dot the sky, the mansion behind them stood as a testament to the power of love, redemption, and second chances. And in that moment, Sarah felt something she hadn't in years, a sense of belonging that reached beyond the walls of the house and into her very soul. The Hartford mansion buzzed with new energy following Sarah's return. Her presence seemed to invigorate not just Matteo, but the entire household, breathing life into the spaces that had once felt weighed down by the past. The staff worked with a renewed sense of purpose, and the Ellen Anderson Foundation began to take on a more prominent role in the community. Yet amidst the activity, Sarah noticed moments of quiet reflection in Matteo, glimpses of a man still grappling with the legacy he carried and the future he was shaping. One afternoon, as Sarah organized documents in her new office, Matteo appeared in the doorway. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, and he looked both exhausted and exhilarated. "You have a minute?" he asked. "Always," Sarah said, motioning for him to sit. He entered, carrying a folder filled with plans and sketches. "We're expanding the Foundation's community outreach programs," he began, laying the folder on the desk. "We want to build satellite centers in towns that don't have access to the resources we're offering here." Sarah flipped through the pages, impressed by the scope of the project. "This is incredible, Matteo, but it's ambitious." "I know," Matteo admitted, "but I've realized that playing it safe isn't how we make a real impact. It's risky, but it feels right." Sarah nodded, meeting his gaze. "And it's worth it," he smiled, leaning back in his chair. "I knew you'd understand. That's why I wanted to show you first." Her heart warmed at his words, and she felt a flicker of pride, not just in his vision, but in the trust they had built. As the weeks passed, the mansion became a hub of activity. Contractors and architects came and went, discussing plans for the satellite centers and their integration into the broader foundation. Matteo threw himself into the work with a focus that bordered on obsession, and Sarah found herself acting as both a sounding board and a steadying presence. It was during one of these hectic days that Elise pulled Sarah aside in the kitchen. "You've been a good influence on him," Elise said, her tone warm but serious. Sarah smiled faintly. "He's finding his way. I'm just here to support him." Elise shook her head. "It's more than that. He listens to you in a way he doesn't with anyone else. You've given him the confidence to lead with his heart." The words stayed with Sarah, their truth settling into her like a quiet revelation. One evening, after the contractors had left and the house had quieted, Matteo found Sarah in the library. She was seated by the fire, a book open on her lap. He hesitated in the doorway before stepping inside. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "Not at all," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. He sat, his expression pensive. "I've been thinking a lot about what we're building here, about the legacy my father wanted to leave, and the one I want to create." "And," Sarah prompted gently, "I want it to be more than just a foundation," Matteo said. "I want it to be a place where people feel they belong, where they see that change is possible, no matter where they start." Sarah closed her book, her attention fully on him. "You're already doing that, Matteo. Every decision you've made, every step you've taken, it's all moving toward that vision." He studied her for a moment, his expression softening. "You've been a part of this from the beginning, Sarah. I couldn't have done it without you." Her cheeks warmed under his gaze, but she held his eyes. "And I wouldn't have wanted to be anywhere else." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with understanding, the unspoken bond between them growing stronger with each shared moment. The next day, Sarah accompanied Matteo to a nearby town where the first satellite center was being planned. The site, a modest building in need of repair, was surrounded by eager community members who had come to hear about the project. As Matteo spoke, outlining the foundation's goals and the impact they hoped to achieve, Sarah watched the crowd. She saw hope in their faces, the kind of hope that had once seemed elusive within the Hartford family. When Matteo finished, the applause was heartfelt, and Sarah felt a swell of pride. "You were incredible," she told him as they walked back to the car. Matteo smiled, his confidence evident. "It feels like we're doing something real, doesn't it?" "It does," Sarah agreed, "and it's just the beginning." That evening, back at the mansion, Matteo found Sarah in the garden. The sun was setting, casting the grounds in a golden glow. He stopped beside her, his hands in his pockets. "I've been thinking about something," he said, his voice quiet. "What is it?" Sarah asked, turning to face him. "This place, this work, it feels complete with you here," Matteo said. "You're not just a part of the foundation, Sarah. You're a part of this family." Her breath caught at his words, and she saw the sincerity in his eyes. "You've given me so much, Matteo," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I did to deserve it." "You were you," he said simply, "and that's more than enough." As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, Sarah felt a sense of belonging she hadn't known she was searching for. The mansion, once a place of sorrow and isolation, now stood as a beacon of love, transformation, and endless possibility. The Hartford mansion was bustling with a steady rhythm, its halls alive with purpose as plans for the Ellen Anderson Foundation expanded. The first satellite center had broken ground, and Matteo had gained a reputation as a leader committed not just to preserving his family's name, but to building something greater. Sarah, now an integral part of the team, found herself drawn deeper into the heart of their mission, her connection to Matteo and the family stronger than ever. One morning, Sarah was sorting through foundation files in her office when Matteo appeared in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this," he said with a grin. "Perfect timing," Sarah replied, taking the cup he offered. "It's been a long morning." He leaned against the edge of her desk, his expression thoughtful. "I wanted to talk to you about something. We've been working on expanding the scholarship program, and I think we need to include more personal outreach, mentors for the recipients, people who can guide them through the process." Sarah nodded, impressed by the idea. "That's a great addition. It makes the program more than just financial support. It creates a community." "Exactly," Matteo said, his enthusiasm growing. "And I was hoping you'd help lead it. You have a way of connecting with people that's rare, Sarah. I think you'd be perfect for it." Her cheeks warmed at his praise, but she nodded. "I'd be honored. This work means the world to me, Matteo." "And you mean the world to us," he said softly. The weight of his words settled between them, unspoken but deeply felt. That afternoon, Sarah joined Elise in the kitchen, helping prepare meals for a group of local volunteers who were assisting with the Foundation's latest project. The 2 women worked in comfortable silence, the bond between them strengthened by months of shared experiences. "Elise," Sarah said suddenly, breaking the quiet, "do you ever think about how much this house has changed?" Elise smiled faintly as she stirred a pot on the stove. "Every day. It feels like a completely different place, and I think that's because of you." Sarah shook her head. It's because of all of us. Matteo, William, even the staff. Everyone had a part in this. Elise set the spoon down, turning to face Sarah. Maybe, but you were the spark, Sarah. You saw something in this family that the rest of us couldn't, and you never gave up. The words touched Sarah deeply, and she found herself blinking back tears. Thank you, Elise. That means more than I can say. Later that evening, Matteo and Sarah sat in the library, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. They were reviewing plans for the foundation, their discussion weaving between strategy and personal reflections. As the conversation waned, Matteo leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the fire. I've been thinking about my father a lot lately, he said, about the choices he made and the legacy he left. He was proud of you, Matteo, Sarah said gently. He saw what you were capable of, even when you doubted yourself. Matteo turned to her, his eyes warm. And I see that in you, Sarah. You've changed my life, and I don't think I've ever really told you how much you mean to me. Her breath caught, and she held his gaze, the room seeming to grow quieter around them. You've given me so much too, Matteo. A purpose, a place to belong. I'll always be grateful for that. He reached across the space between them, his hand covering hers. This isn't just about gratitude, Sarah. I want you to know that you're a part of everything I'm building, not just the foundation, but my life. Her heart swelled at his words, and she squeezed his hand gently. And you're a part of mine. The moment lingered, a shared understanding passing between them that required no further words. As the weeks passed, the foundation's impact grew, touching the lives of more people than Matteo or Sarah had ever imagined. The mansion, once a place of solitude, had become a symbol of hope and transformation, its doors open to those in need. One evening, as the sun set over the grounds, Matteo and Sarah stood together in the garden, the air filled with the faint scent of blooming flowers. The horizon burned gold and orange, casting long shadows that stretched toward the mansion. You were right, Matteo said, his voice quiet but steady. This house, this family, it's not the same as it was. And that's because of you. It's because of all of us, Sarah replied, smiling. We've built something beautiful together. Matteo turned to her, his expression serious yet filled with warmth. I don't know what the future holds, Sarah, but I do know I want you to be part of it, always. Tears pricked her eyes, but she nodded, her heart full. I'm not going anywhere, Matteo. Not anymore. As the last rays of sunlight faded, they stood together, their bond unshakable and their shared vision stretching far into the future. The Hartford family's story, once marked by pain and separation, had become one of redemption, love, and the enduring strength of promises made and kept. The transition from spring to summer brought warmth and vibrancy to the Hartford estate. The once muted tones of the grounds were now alive with color, the gardens bursting with blooms that seemed to mirror the rejuvenation within the mansion itself. The Ellen Anderson Foundation, now firmly established, hummed with activity, and its growing impact rippled through the surrounding communities. Sarah began her mornings early, often walking the estate grounds before the demands of the day took hold. On one such morning, she stopped near the rose garden, her thoughts lingering on how far they had come. The path she walked had been overgrown when she first arrived. Now it was clear and bordered by vibrant roses, a testament to how the family had reclaimed not only the estate but also their lives. Matteo found her there, his tie slightly askew and a folder tucked under his arm. I figured I'd find you here, he said, his voice light. It's my favorite spot, Sarah replied, smiling. It reminds me of everything we've built, and everything we're still building, Matteo added, handing her the folder. We've received letters from some of the scholarship recipients. I thought you might like to read them. Sarah opened the folder, her eyes scanning the handwritten notes. Each letter was a story of hope, of resilience, of lives changed by the opportunities the foundation had created. She looked up at Matteo, her voice thick with emotion. "This is why it matters." He nodded, his gaze steady. "It's not just the foundation, Sarah. It's you. You've been at the heart of this from the beginning." Her chest tightened at his words, but before she could respond, Elise called from the mansion, gesturing for them to come inside. The dining room had been transformed into a planning space, the table covered in maps, schedules, and proposals for the foundation's next projects. Elise stood by the sideboard, pouring coffee for the small team of staff and volunteers who had gathered to discuss the future. Matteo took his place at the head of the table, his leadership evident in the way the group looked to him for direction. Sarah watched as he outlined plans for a new mentorship program, his passion clear in every word. "Sarah will be heading this initiative," he said, glancing at her with a smile. "She's the one who inspired it, after all." The room erupted in nods of approval, and Sarah felt a swell of pride, not just for the work they were doing, but for the trust Matteo placed in her. As the meeting ended and the group dispersed, Elise approached Sarah with a knowing smile. "He listens to you, you know," she said quietly, "in a way he doesn't with anyone else." Sarah laughed softly. "He's a good leader, Elise. He knows how to bring out the best in people." "Maybe," Elise replied, her gaze thoughtful, "but I think you bring out the best in him." That evening, Matteo and Sarah sat on the terrace, the sunset painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The quiet of the moment was a welcome respite from the day's busyness, and they sipped their drinks in comfortable silence. "You've changed this place," Matteo said suddenly, his voice low but certain. "We all have," Sarah replied. "It's been a group effort." Matteo shook his head, turning to face her. "No, Sarah, you've done more than that. You've changed me." Her breath caught, and she met his gaze, the sincerity in his eyes impossible to ignore. "Matteo, I mean it," he said, his voice steady. "You've shown me what it means to lead with purpose, to believe in something bigger than myself, and you've reminded me that it's never too late to start over." She smiled, her heart full. "You've taught me just as much, about resilience, about family, about believing in people." He reached for her hand, his touch warm and grounding. "Then maybe we've taught each other." They stayed like that as the sun dipped below the horizon, the stars beginning to emerge above them. It was a moment of quiet understanding, a shared recognition of the journey they had taken together and the future they were building, not just for the foundation, but for themselves. The next morning, Sarah joined Matteo for a visit to the first satellite center, now fully operational. The building, once worn and forgotten, now buzzed with life. Children played in the outdoor space, while adults gathered for workshops and mentorship sessions inside. It was everything they had envisioned and more. As they walked through the center, Matteo turned to Sarah, his expression thoughtful. "This is just the beginning." "It is," Sarah agreed, her voice filled with quiet determination. "And I'm ready for whatever comes next." For the first time in years, Sarah felt completely at home, not just in a place, but in a purpose. The Hartford family story had become intertwined with hers, and together they had created something lasting, something meaningful. As they stepped outside into the bright morning light, she felt the warmth of their shared vision and the promise of a future filled with hope and possibility. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.